So last Christmas, I put together a video about one of my favorite games ever, Mission in Snowdriftland, this obscure but beloved little platformer that debuted online back in 2006 as part of a limited time promotion for Nintendo's holiday lineup. That video chronicled the months-long quest to once again play this game from my childhood, and it ended with a surprise. At the end of one of our interviews, the game's original developers, Steve and Boaj, revealed to me their plan to actually remake Mission in Snowdriftland.
Yeah, we were really curious how it feels to play Chummy full screen.
Lovingly restoring the original game, now in full screen at 4K resolution with a fully unlocked frame rate. Their plan? To release Mission in Snowdriftland on Steam later this year, just in time for the holiday season. That was 9 months ago, and in the time since I uploaded that first video, the developers Steve and Boaj, who, by the way, I never actually met in person, have been hard at work restoring this game. So what I wondered is, how's the game coming? With Christmas just 3 months away, I wanted to check in on Steve and Boaj's progress, and this time around, I didn't want to just hop on a Discord call with these guys. I wanted to see how the game's development was coming along in person. Out of options and desperate to see how Chubby Snow looks in 4K, I knew what I had to do. So I booked a ticket and got on a flight to Europe in search of answers. After landing in Europe, my girlfriend Samantha, who graciously agreed to help film this adventure, hopped on a train with me from France to Tons of Bits headquarters located in Frankfurt, Germany. There we go. Hey guys, yo, how's it going? So good to meet you finally. Great to meet you, Steve. Hey Boaj, you're Boaj's son, right? Hey, nice to meet you. After picking us up at the train station, Boaj, Steve, and Boaj's son gave us a quick walking tour of Frankfurt before taking us to their offices. So is your office like walking distance from your house, or do you usually drive there?
Depends how long you want to walk.
How long of a walk is it?
No, it's like with bicycle, like 15-20 minutes.
Oh, nice. So you bike usually there?
Yeah.
This building is so pretty.
Oh. Are you guys on? Oh, there we go.
Here.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know this room.
Oh my god, look at your Link statue.
He's got the mask on. Bro. Snowdriftland posters and the Chick Chick Boom posters. Hi. Hi. Hello. I'm Nick. Nice to meet you.
Steve.
Oh wow.
My place. I'm sitting here. All the drawing stuff, concept art.
Nice. Is Steve's desk here? Oh, nice. That's Mario. Everyone's favorite guy. What are these posters here?
These are concept arts which I made, not for projects or games, but just.
Wow. It's so interesting seeing something that's like in such a different art style from Mission in Snowdriftland.
Yeah, I just told Samantha it's to compensate the cute stuff. I made for Snowdriftland, the dark side.
So almost Snowdriftland vibes, but
Yeah,
much darker.
yes, a little bit more black.
What's the story of this Miyamoto thing in here?
Usually it's just sell it to us.
Yeah.
Nintendo. So it's here in the kitchen. But I don't know about this number here.
It has 0.
It's the first one maybe. I don't see this anymore because it's here.
Yeah, it's invisible to you.
Yeah, good that you mentioned it.
when this was filmed, Boaj and Steve were gearing up to launch their new Kickstarter campaign for Mission in Sojifland. A campaign which, by the way, is live right now and allows you to get your hands on a Steam copy of the game for a little over $3. And after getting a tour of their office, it was finally time for me to sit down and play this new version of Snowdriftland and also chat with the guys about the changes they've made to the game. This is the work in progress build right here.
Yes, it is.
Exclusive reveal of the forest in HD. Oh, I like his little jumping into the...
Yeah.
That's new, right?
Is it?
Can I try it? It feels a little sacrilegious to be playing this with a PlayStation controller.
Spot the differences from the original.
Yo, okay, first of all, this parallax is new with a forest background. Man, being able to see this much screen real estate is like amazing. It makes it feel so much like less sort of, I guess, claustrophobic. In the original, you can see maybe 2 platforms, and then over here in this version, you can see it's got to be at least 2.5 times more screen space.
It's much of a difference. Yeah.
Oh my god, that's new. That's the that moon has the face of the scientist,
Yes, that's right.
right?
Professor Schwabbel.
The spiders are different too now. They're no longer moving on an 8-way.
Oh, you remember that?
Yeah. Some of the sprites beyond the background have been redrawn, right? Like, is this tree thing new, or is that the original?
Yes, especially the texture. This is the platform tree, and you can see how many layers are only for this tree. Backstage it looks much more than on the screen. But that's part of the challenge.
Mm-hmm. Have either of your kids played this yet?
I played the original version, so
Yeah. You
I
designed
was 6 years old back then.
you designed a character in it.
Yeah, original.
No way.
From
2006. Yo, look at this.
I didn't know that he was implementing it, so
Yeah, it was not actually made for the game.
So it was a surprise.
yeah.
Do
He
you remember-
just took my drawing and
As he was
scanned
sleeping.
it.
I was like, damn, I have no ideas anymore.
How many people are in the company now total?
Company are like 4.5.
4.5, yeah. But then you two are the only ones focused
For
on.
the game, actually, like in terms of graphics and programming, is actually only 12 of us. Yes.
But we have Beji, he's helping with testing
Oh, nice.
and recording video stuff.
I know every inch of every level. I've played like every level at least 100 times.
And the rest of the team is helping us out in like for the website, social media, testing, and also if we have ideas, we sit together and everyone can contribute his idea. But we couldn't do it without them.
Can I show you some of the level?
Sure.
Still loading. You have the sprite sheet of the level.
Okay.
This is the big texture. And then you have the sprites here in the game.
We're looking into every pixel, how does it look compared to the original artwork, and so it's a different way of working with Chubby now. It's more intense.
In 2006, you
Yeah.
programmed a little animation for this.
But we somehow didn't use it, and we have this little shiny animation here for
Each of the little quills.
Yeah, we have one. So we plan to do it like we have done it now
Yeah.
in this version.
Oh wow.
So there it is,
Yeah.
you can see it.
So this is a more complete. This director's cut is the right word for it.
Yeah,
This is closer to the original vision than than anyone has ever really gotten to play before.
You have more time to, analyze stuff.
Yeah, so we are a game developer again.
Yeah, you are.
It feels really good.
Steve and Boaj also let me get a close look at some of the rewards they're offering for the Kickstarter campaign, including a couple of surprises.
So first of all, we have the sticker sheets actually, because there are 3 different ones.
Wow. These are the first in the world. This is an exclusive.
First in the world.
Okay, so here we got the enemies, right? Some of your biggest sprite work to date here. This and this. These are the stickers.
We have stickers. There's also holographic stickers.
Oh my gosh.
This is the pin.
Earring.
Yeah, I was about to say, it could be a good earring.
Ah, yes, and we have the magnets.
It's cool that you guys are putting this much care and attention into your backer rewards.
Because we have respect for the snowman.
Yeah, we all do.
Also for us actually.
Yeah. So wait, so what was the drum roll? There's something.
Drum roll. We also asked in the Discord channel what kind of stuff they would like. And one, besides the fact that they want Chubby in Super Smash.
What is that? What backer tier is that? Chubby and Smash.
I think it's 10 million or something.
$10 million.
And the most thing which they asked for was a plush.
Oh my god.
And
Wait a minute.
we decided to actually come up with one.
That's amazing. I can't wait to see the final thing. If you keep sort of iterating on it, it's only going to get better from here, and I already love it.
Yes, that's the point.
There were no ones as well here to show maybe the first version.
Yeah, I'm curious. I would love to see where it started.
I mean, I could show you a random Google picture from a snowman, and it's the same, but I will put it in.
Okay, cool.
Like Chubby after some melting.
Just put like a puddle underneath him. The Mission in Snowdriftland Kickstarter campaign is live right now and will be live until October 31st. I'm also pleased to report that the Mission in Snowdriftland Kickstarter has already reached its goal, so the team has introduced stretch goals for new content, including a series of world-specific mini-bosses that were not found in the original game. Oh, yo, this is beautiful. Oh my god. I feel like he should be the first thing you see. Should be up on this corner. Oh my, that is so dope.
That is lit.
I love it. He looks wonderful.
So he's always with you.
He is. He has, well, you know, he's been with me since I was 16, and so now he's more literally with me. Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Volaj and Steve, for taking the time to chat and to show me the current status of the game. It looks great. It just feels like the best version of a game that matters a lot to me and a bunch of other people. I'm super pumped for this project, and I'm wishing you guys all the best of luck on the campaign. I gotta say, it was really cool to go there in person and see that an actual full-time game development studio with employees is working on this game every single day.
From a perspective of someone who wants to show interesting stuff, I think it's more interesting to show not well-known things.
Yeah, and the point of this YouTube channel has been highlighting games that are really, really special to me personally, like Mission in Snowdriftland and Driver San Francisco and Phantom Dust and games like those. And like, I agree with you that I think it is more fun and more edifying and more rewarding to highlight those things.
I would say this is my main passion, of course, and that's why I'm really happy to be back in business, kind of.
If you grow up with games and it's your hobby, there's no question about it. It's the best thing if you can develop a game and maybe like pay the bills by doing so. So we appreciate your work here, your interest, and also from the supporters which didn't forget somehow Mission in Snowdriftland, and also the new ones which here the first time. So yeah, we're really thankful.
On behalf of Steve and Boaj and everyone who's helping make this game happen, I just want to say thanks to y'all for helping revive Mission Snowdriftland. It's extremely surreal and thrilling to watch this come together, and I'm really looking forward to playing this game with everybody else when it drops this winter. If you'd like to check out the Kickstarter for yourself, you can either click the card in the upper right corner of this video, click this annotation at the end of the video, or just click the link in the description.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. The 1980s would deliver to the world a cornucopia of classic arcade games. As innovative a period as it was in gaming, there were certainly genres of video games though through the decade that would heavily be leaned upon by publishers. I mean, how many space shooters were there out there? And how many mascot platforming games were produced after the success of Super Mario Bros. So, taking into account how different Rampage was to anything else that had ever been released, this would result in one of the most popular arcade games of 1986. The destructive title that sees players take control of one of a trio of huge gigantic monsters, destroying buildings while simultaneously trying to survive an onslaught of military attacks, was unlike any video game players had seen before. So, in this video, we are going to look at all of what this game has to offer and go back in time and look at the development and concept behind such a novel creation. Rampage is an important chapter in the story of gaming. So without further ado, this, ladies and gentlemen, is the history of Rampage, one of the most iconic arcade games ever. Yeah!
But first, a word from today's sponsor, which is a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one.
Let's quickly touch on one of the greatest video games that has ever been produced in history, possibly topping any innovations in mankind's existence. Yes, people, you know what's coming. It's Raid Shadow Legends, the ambitious RPG that changed the world forever. The game's full of amazing looking champions, all from their own unique faction, each with a lot of lore. With a line of over 600 characters, the Dwarves faction have their own rich history intertwined in
of Jeff Newman and Brian Collin. Collin was an artist and animator working at Midway during the golden age of arcade gaming. His first project was working as a character animator on the video game known as Discs of Tron back in 1982, and would later go on to work on the likes of Cosmic Cruiser, Spy Hunter and Zwackary. He, along with video game newcomer Jeff Newman, would come up with the unique for its time idea of creating a video game with, well, no point to it at all. Basically, Newman had noticed that while video games were a fairly new medium, that the industry had already begun to rely on certain tropes and concepts in order to form their new games. He notes that traditionally, most arcade games revolve around playing as a hero, trying to achieve a high score. He and Collin, on the other hand, wanted to make something that was a breath of fresh air that would simply allow players to instead just go on, well, a rampage. Reflecting back on the formation of such an outlandish idea, Collin notes that he was living in the Ronald Reagan era of America that was synonymous with urban blight. So while he had noticed the shift from high score gaming to the beginning of narrative, plot-driven titles from the likes of Nintendo, he and his design partner, on the other hand, wanted to make something that simply promised the adolescent fantasy of being gigantic, all-powerful, and being able to destroy everything in sight. Their game concept was literally counterculture to what was popular in gaming at the time. This may have partially been inspired by the fact that the pairing did not consider themselves gamers, and rarely, if ever, visited the arcades. Newman was a graduate in probability, statistics and computer science, who had only picked up a job working at Bally Midway through knowing an employee who played for the same softball team as himself. As for Collin, he had a real love for art, film and cinema, so had taken a degree in film studies. Following his graduation, he had applied for a job as a game designer at Bally Midway, which he jokes he thought was a job role that would revolve around painting pinball cabinets, since pinball was what he had long associated with the company. But most people watching this channel will be more than aware that they are also known for successfully acquiring the licensing for the likes of Space Invaders and Pac-Man in the United States. So it is no surprise that by the time Newman and Collin joined the company, that they'll be more focused on the video game industry. The creation of the game, though, would obviously be more layered than simply coming up with the rampage and destruction idea from day one of development, and in many ways the title was also inspired by the technical limitations that would stand in the pairing's way. The idea of mangling skyscrapers emerged from the fact that with the arcade hardware they had at their disposal, their development team could only move rectangular shapes in the background. So the thought track was that since American cities are largely identical in appearance, they could get away with using the same assets over and over throughout a playthrough, and dust effects from crumbling buildings in their destruction themed game would also be able to conceal any glitchy animations. Further to this, the creation of this iconic game would obviously involve the inception of 3 monsters, an ape named George, a lizard named Lizzie, and a wolf named Ralph. A cast of city-destroying beasts inspired by classic monster movies, a great callback to Colin's film degree. While George is based on King Kong, many mistakenly believe that Lizzie was inspired by Godzilla. However, Colin notes that the character is based on the monster from 20 Million Miles to Earth, as he much preferred Harryhausen and Willis O'Brien movies over the Japanese created monster. Ultimately, gamers would receive the Rampage arcade game in which 3 players could control these giant beasts simultaneously, all of which are humans who have been transformed into these powerful monsters. As noted, gamers rampage, obliterating high-rise buildings from stage to stage, even eating people and destroying the likes of helicopters, tanks, police cars and boats, progressing through the game. Just like in the King Kong movie, these nightmare-like monstrosities have the ability to ascend the sides of buildings, with gamers being able to punch them to pieces in the process. Despite the game at its heart being somewhat of a rampage, traditional gaming elements would ultimately end up still being included. For example, each player has a health bar and can take damage in a number of ways, such as failing to jump off of a collapsing building, or receiving hits from enemy bullets, dynamite and other military projectiles that are in place to hinder the gamer. Health can be recovered by picking up food items, but if all health is lost, the monsters revert back into their puny naked human forms. Inserting a coin though allows the tiny person to mutate back into a beast once more. Punching building windows can sometimes reveal people on the other side signalling for help. Players can gain additional points by grabbing the civilians and holding onto them. However, each can only hold one kind of person. In a throwback to King Kong, George can hold a woman, Lizzie can hold a middle-aged man, and Ralph can hold a businessman. Rampage is set over the course of 128 days in cities across North America, with, as gamers progress, being able to destroy city after city named after real-world locations, a feature we shall touch on even more shortly. Despite Rampage being a huge success on release, what may come as a surprise to many is that management at Bally Midway would originally reject the game completely, considering it to be far too unusual a concept for a video game to ever be commercially viable. There were concerns around the game that it was just too unconventional, and are worried that gamers would have absolutely no interest in playing as who were essentially the bad guys. Luckily though, for the team who had worked on the game, there would be some management changes within the company, who instead would opt to fast track the game and get it to the likes of arcades, convenience stores and pizza parlours as quickly as possible. The game was an instant hit as soon as players laid eyes on the trope-breaking game. The title was fun, colourful and offered a good sense of humour, the likes of which had not been seen before in a video game. People just loved controlling huge monsters, destroying entire cities. Thinking about it, it is no surprise whatsoever that the game would do so well. After all, history tells us that humans adore destroying things, so putting such a heavy emphasis on such a feature in a game was bound to do very well as a result. Even popping bubble wrap is frickin' satisfying for our tiny human minds. The power to destroy is a delicious concept. There is nothing more rewarding than feeling in absolute control, asserting one's will in such a dramatic, irreversible way. Rather frighteningly, these feelings and emotions are so prevalent in our species that many of us feel calmer after being destructive, like venting pent-up energy. Considering all of this, it is no wonder that Rampage would be so popular and so memorable to us. Speaking of our natural lust for destruction, I highly recommend Vsauce's 25-minute deep dive video on the subject, which does an excellent job of explaining why we enjoy crushing and destroying things so much. Rampage channeled these primal needs to absolute perfection. In terms of trying to get as many eyes as possible on this amazing concept, Colin notes that the naming of the cities in the game were after real-world locations was all part of a clever marketing ploy that had been concocted. With 128 cities being included in the game, this meant that they could mail news of the game to local media in 128 different densely populated locations, including in these letters the clickbaity hook: your readers might be interested to learn that insert city here is slated for destruction. This meant that journalistic coverage for the game was even easier to acquire than usual, as Rampage would make the local news in every city across the United States. With a huge demand for this video game, like with most success stories from the time, the next move was clear: get this beloved arcade game ported to every system under the sun. And when I say every system, I mean every system. There were a ridiculous amount of Rampage home conversions, with the game seemingly being ported over to pretty much every home format in existence. Rampage was available on the Atari VCS through to the more powerful systems such as the Amiga. The game appeared everywhere. Obviously, each of these would vary completely differently in terms of quality, but would all follow the same Rampage theme. Some did add some new features though, such as the Atari Lynx version of the game, for example, that added a fourth character, Larry the Giant Rat. Personally, not even being born until the year this game came out, I would play it for the first time in Arcade Party Pack for the Sony PlayStation, a 1999 compilation disc where I also got to play other classics such as Tubin and Super Smash TV for the first time as well. Moving past the release of this game, 2 years later in 1988, Bally Midway would be corporately acquired by Chicago-based company Williams Electronics. And to put into perspective how valued the success of Rampage was, Colin and Newman would be the only two game designers that the new company owners would not choose to fire. The pair would work on another smash hit that saw release in 1989 known as Arch Rivals, a basketball game that in some ways channeled Rampage's spirit, as this 2-on-2 game encouraged opposing players to punch each other in the face in order to steal the ball from one another. Colin and Newman were not really gentlemen who wanted anything to do with rules or tradition. Further to this, 1990 brought Pigskin 621 AD, an arcade game where two teams compete to score as many touchdowns as possible in an American football game that played similarly to rugby. Players control one of the team members navigating the hazards on the field and dispatching opponents using weapons. Violence and destruction continue to ring through this pair's titles. In 1992, the legendary duo moved on from Midway, opening their own gaming company known as Game Refuge Inc., an independent video game developer with offices in Downers Grove, Illinois, producing over 45 games including the satirical war game known as General Chaos. In 1997, Game Refuge Inc. would work collaboratively with Midway to finally release a new Rampage game known as Rampage World Tour, an arcade game that shares much of the same playstyle as the original, however featured a more modern graphical approach. Like the first game, this title too was ported to literally every home format on the market at the time, but sadly never really did seem to have the same impact as the 1986 original game that was published 9 years earlier. I guess by that point the first Rampage game had made such an impact that rampaging and destruction in video games had become much more common, so the franchise never quite managed to stand out anywhere close to the degree that it once did. Plus the world had largely shifted at the time from 2D gameplay to that of 3D. The game seemed dated on arrival. Plus, there were certainly more popular destruction-themed games released that year, such as Nintendo 64's Blast Corps for example, a game where players can control vehicles to destroy buildings, farms and other structures in the path of a runaway nuclear missile carrier. To truly highlight though what level of genius the Rampage creators were onto back in the mid-80s, while Midway executives would at first deny the production of a game about destruction where you play as villains, fast forward to today and many of the most lucrative games in our history have followed a similar format. Take Grand Theft Auto 5 for example, a video game that is all about freeing the player, allowing them the power to go on a virtual rampage. The game broke industry sales records and became the fastest selling entertainment product in history, earning $800 million in its first day and $1 billion in its first 3 days. But years before any of this had happened, we had the pioneering Rampage video game. To cash in on the Rampage license once more, a brand new chapter would be written in the franchise's story, with the release of a Rampage Hollywood movie. While films based around movies are notoriously bad, Rampage is reportedly a fairly respectful film, with some even going as far as to call it the greatest video game licensed movie of all time. The film that would star Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was produced by Warner Brothers, who acquired Midway in 2009 for $33 million. This was the best reviewed live-action video game film in history, up until the release of Pokemon Detective Pikachu anyway. While Colin and Newman would not receive any money for the blockbuster due to not owning the Rampage license itself, Colin was invited to the set, where he would amusingly ask if he was allowed to be an extra, resulting in an amusing scene where the franchise creator can be seen running from the very monsters he created. Colin states that he can't overstate just how excited he was to be on the set, and he even got to meet The Rock, admitting he was smiling like a little kid months and months after the event. While Newman would not be formally invited, he would rock up to the set anyway, resulting in staff asking him who he was and what he was doing there, replying that he was just a programmer but had made the Rampage game. Newman would enjoy his day watching production take place. While the franchise would morph into a movie, the 1986 arcade game should never be underestimated in terms of its groundbreaking, or should I say building-destroying nature, and helped pioneer a whole new unique direction for gaming in the process. Rampage is one hell of a frickin' important arcade game, no matter how simple and rudimentary it may look in comparison to the AAA heavy hitters that are available on the market now. Colin and Newman were some forward thinkers. So I guess, ladies and gentlemen, that was the history of Rampage, an iconic arcade game that would change gaming forever. Let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of today's video, and why not share some of your memories about playing this classic game. If you enjoyed today's video covering an old school arcade game, why not check out my recent coverage on Renegade? Or maybe you would like to see my video on the Combat Tribes, a game developed by beat-em-up legend Yoshihisa Kishimoto, following the release of Double Dragon 2 The Revenge. If you are new here, do not forget to like this video, hit that subscriber button, and ring that notification bell to ensure you do not miss future uploads. Finally, I would like to give a huge thank you to my Patreon backers, who, through their additional funding, allow me to make videos on non-trending topics like this on a full-time basis. So special thanks go out to Sebastian Velez, A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heo Paulo Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hats here. One of my greatest undertakings ever on this channel was managing to upload standalone deep dives on nearly every Double Dragon game that has ever been made. Due to this, I have often been given requests to look at some of the titles directly linked to the series, such as the Combat Tribes, the cooperative beat-em-up that franchise creator Yoshihisa Kishimoto brought to the table after Double Dragon 2, which we have now already covered. And of course there is then Rage of the Dragons, the very subject of today's video. Not only is this critically liked Neo Geo fighting game linked to the Double Dragon series, but during its development it was hoped that it would indeed be a Double Dragon game, with many characters from the famous series planned to be featured. In this upload we are going to look at the history of this cult classic, what it brings to the table, but most importantly cover the changes that were made to make it its own standalone game. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Rage of the Dragons, a game that was planned to be the last ever Double Dragon arcade game. Yeah! Double Dragon, Double Dragon, Double Dragon, a franchise we have looked at time and time again on here. The cooperative beat-em-up that would start it all, inspiring countless other titles across the arcade medium. Eventually though, the gaming industry would evolve and Street Fighter II would define another genre of games involving brawling. Versus fighting games would champion player versus player combat, rejuvenating arcades and giving gamers a reason to keep inserting coins into a machine whether they had beaten the main game or not. Fighting games of course would prove just as popular in the homes as they were out and about, so in order to try and keep the Double Dragon franchise relevant, the natural progression for the series would be transitioning it from a side-scrolling brawler style of play to the more modern fighting game approach. The first of these would be Double Dragon 5, and while this idea sounded potentially decent on paper, the actual execution would end up being downright awful. This game, that would appear on the Super Nintendo, Sega Mega Drive and Atari Jaguar, was not even in the same league as Street Fighter II and others. Unlike the games that made the franchise famous, Double Dragon 5 was not developed by Technos Japan, but instead American company Leyland Interactive Media, who would program a game loosely based on the Double Dragon Western animated series, of all things. This 1994 game ended up panning out to be terrible, offering up a fighting game with crude graphics, shallow combat, and poorly executed knockoff elements ripped from the Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat series. Double Dragon 5 was certainly a low point for old Bimmy and Jimmy. The following year of 1995, Technos of Japan would attempt to get right what Leyland Interactive had got so wrong, resulting in the release of yet another Double Dragon fighting game, this time for the Neo Geo. This one was designed by Maneki Ebenuma, the man behind the fairly appreciated Super Double Dragon, a game that ended up being fairly decent for what it was, even though that it is missing an introduction and ending to the game due to development time constraints. Ebenuma, who was a fan of the series before even commencing work at Technos, would deliver a fighter that took inspiration from the poor performing Double Dragon Hollywood movie, offering up characters who had previously debuted in that feature length. The game includes a roster of 10 fighters from the Double Dragon universe, and in my opinion is not that bad at all. It is what it is really, and less of an embarrassing mess than that of Double Dragon 5. Yuck. Sadly, the Double Dragon Neo Geo fighting game would be the last Double Dragon game ever to be made by Technos of Japan, as following the release of the game, the Japanese company would file for bankruptcy and cease operations. The world would be without a new Double Dragon game for many years. However, 7 years later in 2002, a group of individuals planned to bring the dead license back to the world of arcade fighting games. After all, Double Dragon was one of the most famous arcade franchises ever, so it was almost criminal that it was being ignored. Development of such a game was underway between Japanese company Noise Factory and Brezasoft, with design chiefly being handled by Mexican team Evoga. Noise Factory Company Limited was a Japanese video game developer and publisher based out of Osaka. It was one of the development companies of SNK, established by former Atlus staff members who previously worked on Princess Crown for the Sega Saturn. While never producing a fighting game, they had created beat-em-ups such as Gaia Crusaders and Sengoku 3. Brezasoft is a game developer founded by former SNK employee Ikichi Kawasaki, which would later be merged into Playmore, and Evoga stands out as the first Mexican company ever to focus solely on making video games, first releasing Evolution Soccer in arcades, working with Brezasoft in 2001. Evoga envisioned Rage of the Dragons as the sequel to the Neo Geo fighting game version of Double Dragon that we touched on earlier. However, unlike the previous installment from 7 years before, this brand new game would contain tag team matches players. Holla holla holla. Something that made absolutely perfect sense considering the success that the likes of Marvel vs. Capcom, King of Fighters and Tekken Tag were all having sales-wise by including tag team mechanics. This format technically fits Double Dragon in the world of fighting games like an absolute glove. After all, the word double is in the frickin' title to begin with, and the series has been promoted from day one as being a cooperative affair revolving around two brothers teaming up. Thinking about it, the Lee brothers, Bimmy and Jimmy, have to be considered one of the most famous tag teams of the 1980s, up there with the likes of the Legion of Doom, Demolition, the Hart Foundation, and even the Chuckle Brothers, To Me to Bloody You. A true tag team Double Dragon game was an amazing concept on paper, but sadly none of this was ever to be. Well, at least in an official capacity, as sadly Avoga were unsuccessful in obtaining the intellectual rights for the Double Dragon characters to be able to be included in their existing project. Instead, the Double Dragon license would end up in the hands of a company known as Million, a new company that was created by former Technos Japan staff members, with them going on to publish the next official Double Dragon game in 2003. Double Dragon Advance for the Game Boy Advance, an amazing side-scrolling beat-em-up that celebrates the franchise's roots, created under the leadership of Maneki Ebenuma, the same Ebenuma who had created the Neo Geo Double Dragon game that Avoga was so keen to make a sequel to. Avoga though would not give up on their goal to create a tag team fighting game, and instead their title would evolve into the game known as Rage of the Dragons, a homage to Double Dragon on the Neo Geo rather than an officially licensed sequel. The title that gamers would get would include a refined tag team combat system whereby gamers could switch between their fighters fluidly during gameplay. This has tactical benefits. For example, the character who is not being controlled can recover their energy bar when not fighting. In typical tag team fashion, characters can also perform double team maneuvers, whereby two fighters attack an opponent at the same time for extra damage. Teddy Long is a massive fan of this game. The game also features a number of other fighting game strategic quirks, which we shall soon get to discussing. However, for now, let's talk about the game's story and characters, and how this all pays homage to Double Dragon. The game offers a roster of 14 playable characters from a location known as Sunshine City that is in ruin. Like in Double Dragon and many other classic beat-em-ups, this city is a no man's land ruled by gangs that not even the police can contain. In this metropolis, a chaotic situation exists involving a cult-like group who worship an entity known as the Black Dragon. The leader of this gang has grown in influence and has become rich and powerful, now even owning his own island off the coast of the city. He and his Black Dragon sect rule over Sunshine City and have become forever more ruthless as a result. In the end, two brothers decide that enough is enough and it's time for a change, so Billy and Jimmy set off to confront the narrative's villains. If you are not too familiar with Rage of the Dragons but have already heard earlier in this video that the makers failed to acquire the Double Dragon license, then you may be wondering why brothers Billy and Jimmy still star in this game. Well, that's because these are now a different set of siblings, who just so happen to have the same first names as the legendary Lees. And these are instead the Lewis brothers, Jimmy Lewis and Billy Lewis, the lesser known Bimmy and Jimmy. In this fighting game, the Lewises are not the only characters who pay homage to well-known Double Dragon characters. Further to them, we have a Bubbo, a respected street fighter from Sunshine City in a Bobo's place. A Bubbo with his assistants, Linda and Roxy, more familiar first names, want to fight in the game to increase his notoriety as a fighter and take control of the Sunshine Mafia. We also have Kang, who was based off of Burnoff from the Double Dragon franchise, with further references to the Big Daddy of beat-em-ups throughout. With a roster of 14 though, the game features many completely original characters too, helping give Rage of the Dragons its own identity despite many of the various obvious nods to the Brawler of Legends. Using these fighters, gamers can choose from one of 7 default pairings. However, it is of course also possible to create 80 different custom combinations too. If players choose to combine Billy and Jimmy for a playthrough, a secret hidden ending is revealed via winning the tournament with them, which is a nice little touch. Being a Neo Geo game, Rage of the Dragons uses a 4-button layout, with the 4 buttons each being mapped to a strong kick, strong punch and weak punch. The tag in tag out mechanic can be taken advantage of by combining 2 of these buttons, which as mentioned earlier is a great way to gain back some lost health. The team attacks, which we also touched on, are known as team duplex attacks, but in order to perform them, most characters must have energy in their combo gauges. Speaking of which, these auxiliary meters are located at the bottom of the screen and can be filled by landing hits against opponents in combat. A full meter can allow for special moves to be performed, such as counter attacks and super moves, much like in many other classic fighting games. The game also includes a mechanic from Power Instinct, whereby breakable barriers can be shattered to extend the field of play. Interestingly, characters can also surrender in matches by hitting all 4 buttons simultaneously. By doing so, their energy can be sacrificed to give their tag team partner one last-ditch effort to gain a victory. Rage of the Dragons has built up quite a reputation for itself over the years as a respected fighting game amongst connoisseurs. Fighters Generation would comment that Rage of the Dragons features an interesting cast based on the beloved retro beat-em-up series, and it's one of the most interesting SNK fighting games released in some time. Hardcore Gaming 101 would cover the existence of this game, summarising that it could be argued that Rage of the Dragons is more style than substance, but that also implies that substance is bad. It's not. It's just not particularly deep nor innovative. But it's an excellent game for anyone into late era 2D fighters, and doubly so for its rad character designs and awesome soundtrack. The Neo Geo cult would note that aesthetically, Rage of the Dragons does a good job, with graphical inspiration appearing to be taken from Mark of the Wolves. They also comment on how fluid the game plays, especially when mixed with a soundtrack that has a Double Dragon sound to it. Pair all of these positive responses with my own comment section's lust to see this game spotlighted on here, there is no doubt that the game has a fan base and an air of modern day appreciation around it. Avoga, the Mexican company who designed both this game and the characters, began bankruptcy procedures and ceased operations completely in 2004, and as a result there would never be a Rage of the Dragons 2 in the future, or a third Double Dragon Neo Geo game, depends how you look at it. The Japanese company who they worked with developing the game, Noise Factory, would live on, and several of the Rage of the Dragons characters including Jimmy, Lynn, Elias and Mr. Jones would all re-emerge as hidden guest characters in the Noise Factory game Matra Melee, so maybe we should consider looking at that one in the future, especially when we bring into account that it is going even deeper down the Double Dragon related rabbit hole. The 2003 game Matra Melee, which functions as part of the Power Instinct series, was interestingly published by Atlus, the same company who had also published Million's Double Dragon Advance game that year. So amusingly, Atlus had both Jimmy Lee and Jimmy Lewis in video games that they had published around exactly the same time. All in all, bringing Rage of the Dragons and Double Dragon even closer together than before. So I guess, ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of Rage of the Dragons, a video game that was planned to be the last ever Double Dragon arcade game. If you enjoyed this video and want more Double Dragon related or fighting game related content, I have both a Double Dragon and fighting game playlist for you to check out preceding this video. I am the only man on the internet who seems to have been crazy enough to have made deep dive videos covering most of the sprawling Double Dragon series and its related games. If this sounds like the kind of content that would be your bag, baby, then be sure to hit that subscriber button and ring that notification bell to see all of my... Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. When it comes to the world of Sega games, few have ever been quite as memorable as that of Altered Beast. This extremely early 1988 beat-em-up would not only wow arcade gamers with its visual style, but the title would also end up featuring as the Sega Mega Drive's first ever packing game. The game was loud, proud and in players' faces, which when paired with the title's impressive graphics and awesome transformation mechanics, you could not look at Altered Beast. As unforgettable as this Sega experience was, it would be tough to argue though that the gameplay on offer was any better than average at best, resulting in consumers indulging in an adventure that was more about style over substance. While Altered Beast at times feels slow and clunky, what if I told you that there is in fact another arcade beat-em-up, but one that features Altered Beast-like amazing transformation mechanics, but mixes them with polished, refined, cooperative, more modern beat-em-up gameplay. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the Metamorphic Force, a game that takes what Altered Beast brought to the table and takes it to an all different level of quality. Yeah! As mentioned in the introduction, Altered Beast's significance cannot be argued. Over time, the game has become iconic, and if its impact in the arcade scene, or its place as the Mega Drive's first packing game are not accolades large enough to ensure that it is never forgotten, then the fact that Sega continued to bung it in every collection up until modern day means even modern gamers are still playing this one. The 1988 game by Makoto Uchida was and still is a big deal, but as significant as it was, it would be tough to make a case for the game being his best work. You see, in the following year of 1989, Uchida would develop Golden Axe for Sega, a cooperative side-scrolling beat-em-up with a medieval theme that was mechanically heavily inspired by Yoshihisa Kishimoto's flourishing Double Dragon series. Double Dragon would end up becoming the blueprint game for practically all cooperative beat-em-up games to come, carving the path forward for the likes of Streets of Rage, Final Fight, Turtles Arcade and many more. Altered Beast on the other hand was developed before this style of play had become the standard, which is one of the reasons as to why the title feels more flawed than dozens of other beat-em-ups that were developed just only shortly after. Meaning the main reason people have had to go back to the game has always been for the transformations above all else. With all of this said, this obviously brings us around to Metamorphic Force, a 1993 beat-em-up that was developed by Konami, that takes the coolest feature that is found in Altered Beast, and in my opinion brings the feature to the next level by pairing it with pure beat-em-up bliss. The fact that this is a brawler delivered by Konami in the early 90s likely offers to you a seal of quality with regards of what to expect with this one, with of course the company being renowned for many of the amazing beat-em-ups that have been offered to fans throughout this legendary period. Of course, the best known of this batch of these were massive licenses from outside of gaming, such as the Simpsons arcade game, the Turtles coin-op titles and the astounding 6-player X-Men arcade game. These titles were bright, bold and on the whole simply fantastic, still to this day holding a place in the hearts of many who would make trips to the arcades throughout this era. Metamorphic Force would be cut from the same cloth as these astonishing games, but running from the same arcade board as Konami's Mystic Warriors game, a ninja-themed cooperative side-scrolling shoot-em-up that was developed by the same team behind the likes of Sunset Riders, functioning as a pseudo-sequel if you will. In fact, Metamorphic Force would not be the only beat-em-up that came into existence utilising this board, but also the game known as Violent Storm, another lesser known Konami arcade beat-em-up that we have already spotlighted on this channel in the past. As for Metamorphic Force, the game offers 4-player cooperative, allowing gamers to choose between 4 different characters who all have the ability to morph into different anthropomorphic beasts. These include the likes of Ban, a martial artist who can transform into an ancient Greek minotaur, Claude, a swordsman who can change into a white werewolf, Max, a fighter with a boxing style who can turn into a were-panther, and Ivan, a hunter and wrestler who has the ability to metamorphosize into a werebear, which I guess is the opposite of a Care Bear. Developed 5 years after Altered Beast, the influence is clear to see, with not only some familiar transformations being present, but ideas once again taken from ancient Greek mythology too. The game is the evolution, or should I say metamorphosis, of what a transformation early beat-em-up like Altered Beast could have become if it saw an early 90s sequel. The game opens up by informing gamers that this title is set in the year 1990 XAD, stating that after many years of peace and quiet, the evil king, ruler of the Empire of Horror, has arisen from the dead. Or should I say, wised from his grave. A mountain is then seen emerging from a stormy sea, with the king shown looking down maniacally from the sky, looking to reign over the world once more. But then the Greek goddess Athena shows up to throw a spanner in his works, with her declaring to the player, you must defeat his evil ways, and that the souls of the warriors and their 4 powerful metamorphic guardians who contain this evil king in battle many years have been revived once again to stop the villain. The souls of the 4 guardians return to Earth as brave youths in present time to stop the evil, with the game's attract screen introducing the foursome to potential players. Before the adventure starts, the game declares that one of the most fierce and desperate battles ever is about to begin. So with a promise like that on the table, who wouldn't want to insert a coin into this classic arcade cabinet? After characters have been activated on the character select screen, the heroes are seen being teleported to the mountain island seen in the intro, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers style, bringing gamers to this exciting action-packed video game's first stage. The opening level stylistically features a very similar setting to the opening area that can be found back in Alter Beast, offering a background laden with ancient crumbling pillars and ruins, overall doubling down on the mythological themes that this game is going for. Players will also quickly note that in this X-Men arcade-like beat-em-up, enemies tend to also come in the form of anthropomorphic beasts, meaning that this whole new world relies on metamorphic forces. As the title would suggest, like Alter Beast, characters that the player controls start off stages in their human forms, but can take their more powerful beast forms by collecting golden statue power-ups, which are either dropped by enemies or found within random chests that are dropped from the sky above. The metamorphosis of playable fighters is particularly cool, as each is enveloped by an explosion of light that fills up half of the screen. Taking a leaf from Golden Axe's playbook, like the small elves found in that game, this title features anthro-rodent enemies that pop up at random times, who can supply the player with items that replenish health, those that increase the player's score, or simply golden statues to allow for metamorphosis. These items will be dropped at random times or can be grabbed instantaneously by striking these prize-carrying opponents. Once again, related metamorphic force back to X-Men Arcade, or even Golden Axe once more for that matter, when characters are in their transformed beast states, they can perform screen-filling special attacks that destroy all of the enemies on the screen at once. As players progress through the first stage and into a temple-like setting, it becomes clear pretty quickly that elements of this game all around often look quite Golden Axe-like, aside from just the sack-carrying rodent enemies. The game looks and feels like X-Men Arcade, Golden Axe and Alter Beast all mixed into one, which certainly is not a bad combination at all. Every stage of course has a boss who must be taken down in order to move forward, which once again, like in the X-Men game, one of the titles I persistently will keep referencing, every boss fight opens with actual voice acting, allowing for each of them to deliver a cheesy quote. However, to be fair, we do not have anything quite as awesome this time as I am Magneto, Master of Magnet. The first boss fight takes place against Cabrios, a half-goat anthropomorphic opponent who wields a Grim Reaper-like sickle. While this boss and others offer a nice change of pace and variety of different attacks, one of the best elements included is their death animations, when each of them are defeated. Check out this for example. How satisfying is that? Action moves on to the internals of a fiery, lava-filled cave, where much of the same style action is offered, with more opponents popping up who look rather Golden Axe-like in nature. The high-intensity music that is playing throughout every area also massively adds to the overall intensity this epic affair offers, with a variety of instruments being simulated from electronic guitars to electronic keyboard symphonies. Wow! In this particular Cave of Fire, in the closing moments players must take down a burning phoenix-like anthropomorph, who can strike players with his sword or take gamers down taking advantage of his devastating flaming tornado attacks. This whole game looks and sounds freaking great. At points the game also offers bonus stages, this time drawing inspiration from the likes of Final Fight and Street Fighter, where instead of a car, this time fighters must destroy a huge statue within an allotted time. Doing this allows players to regain lost health and gain other benefits such as receiving gold statues for transformations. Stage 3 allows players to move from a fire to an ice themed setting, with more new enemies being introduced into the fold such as anthropomorphic elephants. There are also titans that pop up from the stage backdrop that open their mouths to spit out smaller opponents for the player to fight against. If you have never played this game before, and this section feels a little like deja vu, that would be because this feature appears to have been lifted straight from Konami's earlier X-Men arcade game, which featured sentinels rising up from the stage background and opening their mouth to unleash robotic opponents against the player. It is interesting to see so much familiarity surface throughout Metamorphic Force. The stage also features lasers that shoot players from a background which I think Konami-wise first showed up in Turtles the arcade game, before finally taking on a chonky heavy robotic opponent who reminds me a lot of the X-Men arcade game's Nimrod boss fight. Stage 4 takes place in a forest-like setting, the sort of region that always seems to pop up in these fantasy-themed brawlers. The stage is all around beautiful and very scenic, and sees other Konami beat-em-up elements included in the game for the first time. For example, when the players jump off a huge cliff edge down to a further layer below. At the end of this area, players must take down a two-headed giant monster. If players are able to deplete this bad mofo's health, eventually he turns to stone before exploding, leading to another satisfying end to a stage. The game also features a super high-speed bonus level that scrolls in much of the same way as the sewer surfing section found in Konami's Turtles in Time. This bonus round though scrolls at an even faster pace as players try and take down as many opponents as possible in a single run. Now, depending on which version of the game you play, whether it be the original Japanese version of the game or newer international release, the title would differ. In the Japanese version, players must simply play a stage involving just one new stage boss. However, in the international version, to allow for additional coin munching, players must now run a boss gauntlet against all previous end level opponents. Once all of these have been eliminated in this Colosseum setting, gamers must face off against a boobylicious, oversized she-devil who attempts to bring death by snoo-snoo to the player. The final stage sees players venturing into the Evil King's Keep, where of course the challenge on offer is brought up yet another notch. The stage is longer than those featured previously, with plenty of enemies in abundance, offering an assortment of those we have seen before. The whole area offers players a more intense challenge in an effort to drain those coins. A mid-stage boss fight eventually occurs against a roboticized skeleton, offering gamers a new foe to compete against. Defeating him reveals that the player has been fighting on a platform throughout the bout, leading to of course a classic beat-em-up lift section, because as pointed out in every beat-em-up video I make, it is illegal to program a beat-em-up without including this mechanic somewhere. I have to say though, I do like the stained glass window in the background. Bloody marvellous, isn't it? Of course, as action progresses, the scene gets filled up with more and more enemies, often filling almost the entire screen at points. As players venture on, it is possible to battle against the Evil King himself, who provides an adequate challenge for competitors. Being a game that is all about metamorphic force, this is of course not even his final form though, as upon his defeat, he metamorphosizes into a huge dragon-like beast, offering up the true final challenge for those who want to beat this arcade game once and for all. If, and I mean if, gamers can overcome this fiery onslaught, it soon unfolds that this is not the final challenge at all. And once his dragon form has been destroyed, his soul rises out of his body, offering yet another form that players must try their best to overcome. If players can get the best of him, the Evil King is well and truly defeated in this third phase. Upon completion, as the game's credits roll, the King's Castle can be seen crumbling Castlevania style, with our heroes leaping from the roof above. Soon the game reveals that not only is the castle crumbling, but the entire island that rose from the sea is descending back to its watery depths too. With the title stating, as a result of the fierce efforts of the four Guardians, the Evil King is defeated. The evil empire has sunk into the deep ocean and the people are freed from its threats. Peace is restored to the world. However, we fear the evil enemy may return someday, so till then, the four Guardians will lay dormant until summoned upon again. With the game closing out, seeing our heroes ascend back to the heavens themselves, where Athena's shown expressing her pleasure. So that overall is what can be experienced within a playthrough of Metamorphic Force. As you can see, the game perhaps holds the crown of the most refined beat-em-up video game that features anthropomorphic transformation mechanics. While Alter Beast may have been the first game from this genre to include this eye-catching feature, Metamorphic Force will bring it back in true Konami style. With this said though, and the game being of such high quality, perhaps you may be wondering why this game does not get talked about more, but Alter Beast forever stays in the front of our retro gaming consciousness. Well, as stated, apart from Sega bringing back Alter Beast from its grave time and time again, when Metamorphic Force came out, it was never ported to any home consoles, and was left as an arcade exclusive. so the only gamers who got to play this one at the time were those who stumbled across it in the arcade. Whereas Altered Beast was a game that most Mega Drive owners owned in their homes in one form or another. Another factor to add to this game's overall obscurity today is that I feel that it is overshadowed by its much more famous licensed cousins. More people are likely to remember and celebrate the likes of X-Men Arcade, The Simpsons and the Turtles arcade games than they are likely to remember Metamorphic Force, simply due to the prestigious licenses attached to the former. Next, we also have to take into account that this game did not surface until 1993, 6 years after the original cooperative Double Dragon game, with the arcade market now completely flooded with high quality beat-em-ups throughout. So although this was a better game than Altered Beast in my opinion, I do not feel Metamorphic Force stood out as strongly in 1993 as Altered Beast did back in 1988 previously. As mentioned throughout the video, Metamorphic Force was packed to the brim with beat-em-up elements we have seen many times before this. That does not mean though that by combining all of these features together that we wouldn't get a transformation themed brawler that was extremely well crafted as a result. All in all, I think the game is criminally overlooked at times and delivers everything you would possibly want from this gaming genre. Metamorphic Force is the natural evolution of Altered Beast, an altered Altered Beast if you will, or even a metamorphic magnum opus. I challenge you to name me a better transformation themed beat 'em up than this one. This game is the ace of human to anthropomorphic adventures. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of Metamorphic Force, a game that in my opinion is much better than Altered Beast today and deserves more attention. If you have been following this channel for a while, you will be aware that I have covered a bountiful amount of beat 'em ups. So if you are new here, why not check out my beat 'em ups playlist to see dozens upon dozens of videos.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here, ready to cover with you yet another interesting chapter in gaming history. Last month on the channel we took a deep dive look at River City Girls, one of the most critically acclaimed beat-em-ups of the modern Renaissance period that the genre is currently experiencing. In fact, this title in the River City series was so well received that not only have they just announced that they are currently developing a River City Girls 2, but one of the older games in the River City series is seeing an official English translation and release in the West for the first time. Shindiketsu Koha Kunio Tachi no Banka was a game for the 16-bit Japanese Super Famicom that would see the original debut of the now beloved teenage heroines known as Kyoko and Misako, with the game set for a re-release on the Nintendo Switch under the new name of River City Girls Zero. So in anticipation of this release, in today's video we are going to take an in-depth look at this forgotten classic, analyse its historical context, and discuss exactly what this game brings to the table. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of River City Girls Zero. Yeah! By this point in time we have already spent quite a bit of time covering the River City series, or should I say Kunio-kun series, the name the franchise often goes by in Japan. This of course all started with Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun, the world's first ever beat 'em up that starred our hot-blooded high school student Kunio as he sought revenge for his friend Hiroshi against the various gangs. The arcade game that was created by Yoshihisa Kishimoto was reskinned as Renegade in the West, but the Kunio-kun brand would continue to expand and grow in Japan and beyond, while Kunio himself would begin to feature in a number of sports games featuring a cast of Japanese high school students, with the first being a dodgeball game. He would return to action in downtown Neketsu Monogatari, a beat-em-up that was localized as Street Gangs and River City Ransom in other parts of the world, with the original version of this 8-bit Nintendo video game once again being different to anything that came before it. It managed to successfully mix up beat-em-up and RPG elements for the first time. The game was special as characters could explore an open world in a non-linear manner and obtain items from stores, collect money and improve character stats.
In many ways, this game was almost as innovative as the original 1986 arcade game. Next, Japan would receive Shodai Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun, a Super Famicom game I intend to analyse deeper on this channel down the line. That has yet to officially make it to our shores. While this was the game that brought the beat-em-up RPG formula to the realm of 16-bit for the first time, today of course we are more interested in looking at the next game in the series. This particular one would act as the story prequel to the River City Girls game that so many of us know and love now. First released in 1994, this title marked a first for the franchise overall, as IP holders Technos of Japan would outsource development of an installment in the series for their first time. A practice that the company were notorious for partaking in when it comes to their Double Dragon license. In this game's case, development would be handled by a studio known as Almanic, which while on the surface may sound grim, when we consider how some of Bimmy and Jimmy's games turned out from the period, Almanic were a bit different, as the majority of the staff working for this new studio were made up of experienced former Technos of Japan employees, so the group was full of solid hands. In fact, when it comes to Kunio games, the team that would work on the games would be somewhat of an all-star lineup, with the likes of Noriyuki Tomiyama functioning as the game's producer, who was a man who headed both the Kunio dodgeball and football video games, with the game's programming being handled by Michiya Hirasawa, who worked on River City Ransom. The icing on the cake of these teams though was none other than the godfather of beat-em-ups himself and inventor of the Kunio-kun franchise, Yoshihisa Kishimoto, who would take the director helm for this game just like he did with both the original game in the series and the previous Super Famicom title. Speaking of Kishimoto, he originally envisioned a graphical style for the game that harkened back to Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun. However, Koji Agata, who had handled the character design for the 1986 one, was sadly unavailable to partake in the creation of this one, due to being committed to another project. So the art style for this game would end up looking drastically different to what had come before it. So that is how this project would come together, but what would the actual game contain? Story-wise, the game would choose to follow the events of both Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun and Shodai Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun, choosing to ignore all the events and characters that were included within downtown Neketsu Monogatari. It is likely that this choice was made due to Kishimoto not working on the latter, but this messy story between the games is at least acknowledged and poked fun at in the most recent River City Girls games, with even the fact that only certain games were localised in the West being pointed out in fourth wall breaking moments. The game that is set to be localised as River City Girls 0 surprisingly does not feature a plot where you begin a playthrough, as the stars that way forward technology have been pushing so hard recently, but instead a story begins to unfold around the familiar Kunio and his friend and rival Ricky, with the pair being held in a juvenile correction facility at the start of the game. It appears that the pair of boys have been arrested for committing a hit and run, which is not remotely out of character at all, I guess, especially when you consider that Kunio was the nutter high school student who would storm a Yakuza headquarters in the 1986 game. Kunio is one bad mofo. The two are visited where they are being held captive by Hiroshi, the young lad who Kunio has protected so much in the past game's events. Ricky and Kunio claim they are completely innocent in all of this, and in fact claim to be fully aware of being framed for a crime they did not commit. After some brawling internally in the prison in full prison garb, the pairing escape on a mission to clear their name of any wrongdoing. Which is pretty ridiculous when you think about it, as going out into the world street brawling is blatantly illegal as well. Anyway, River City Girls 0 can be played either singularly or cooperatively, in the fashion of many other classic beat-em-ups. For the purpose of storytelling, if you are playing the game in single player mode, you can switch between the two fighters with a simple tap of the Super Famicom select button, giving gamers a little bit more choice. The game can be played on two difficulty settings, but gamers must play it on the harder of the two in order to experience the full story of the game. Speaking of a story, the game follows the conventions of previous titles, in that this one mixes up beat-em-up action with RPG mechanics. However, something new to this one is you can recruit new members to your party as you make progress, including the two characters who are stars of the recent River City Girls game, Misako and Kyoko. This brings the game's total selection of playable characters up to a tally of 4, with players gaining access to Misako after clearing the Niketsu High School setting, and Kyoko after completing the Hanazono High School part. Thinking about it, this makes the opening cutscene from the most recent River City Girls game suddenly make a lot more sense, as it contains a throwaway gag seeing both of the young ladies in detention, with one of them stating to the other that they don't even go to the same school. So why are they in detention together? I finally get it. As for the 4 characters, like in many beat-em-ups, there are mechanical differences between them. Our franchise's star, for example, Kunio, the hot-blooded tough guy, can perform whirlwind kicks, spinning headbutts, and back fists. And his friend and rival Ricky can use his signature Mac Punch, Screw Upper, and back kick. As for the girls and their moves and placing this beat-em-up story's debut, Misako of Niketsu High School is Kunio's girlfriend, and has joined him in battle to help clear his name. She can perform a whirlwind kick, screw attack, and back kick. It is of note that a character called Misako also appeared in the franchise's previous dodgeball and football game, but due to cosmetic differences, no one was aware if or not this was intended to be the same character. More recent releases, Niketsu Koha Kunio-kun Special and its sequel, River City Tokyo Rumble, have fully established though that they are indeed the very same person. As for Kyoko, the ponytailed blue blazer wearing maniac, she is obviously here to help her boyfriend Ricky, displaying opposite personality traits to that of Misako. Her special moves consist of the mat kick, screw slap and spinning chop. Between the foursome there are also further mechanical differences. For example, only the lads can perform grabs or mount enemies, whereas the girls can move and fight at a much quicker pace. Every character in the game though can perform uppercuts, drop kicks, knee drops, jumping kicks and stomps. Away from beat 'em up action, there are also other gameplay elements that are introduced at specific points to break up the playstyle. Most notably bike stages, a throwback to the original port of Niketsu Koha Kunio-kun that appeared on the Famicom. In this game though, these bike sections are played through from a third person perspective, instead making this experience more Road Rash-like than ever before. Which makes sense I guess, bearing in mind that Road Rash was released between these games. The game is full of memorable characters, both those who are friendly with our playable cast and those who are most certainly not. While there are many new antagonists who players must go up against in this game, some very familiar ones make a return too, such as the imposing, large and in charge Misuzu, who must be conquered once again in this game. I'm about to give a huge spoiler, so click away now if you intend to play this one on the Nintendo Switch for the first time soon. But one of the most significant characters in the game is a character known as Ken, the very youth who would impersonate Kunio in the hit and run incident that would land our favourite hot-blooded tough guy in a correction facility. It transpires that Ken is actually Kunio's long-lost brother, of all people, but why was he trying to get Kunio into such deep trouble? Well, the main villain from the original arcade game, known as Sabu, makes a return here. If you can recall what went down in that first game, basically to avenge Hiroshi, Kunio would storm the Yakuza headquarters and beat the living crap out of everyone, including the gang's leader Sabu. Keeping all of this in mind, it is no surprise that feeling disrespected, the Yakuza head honcho would plot his revenge, even going as far as to go out of his way to adopt Ken from an orphanage, putting him up to impersonating Kunio to frame him for a crime. If I was in charge of the most powerful gang in Japan, I'd probably just have Kunio killed. But you do you, Sabu, even if your stupid plan reeks of something that Dr. Evil would come up with in an effort to appear more creative. Still though, as cartoony and silly as this plan may sound, everything does take a much more sinister turn, with him going as far as actually shooting Kunio and Ricky's girlfriends, Misako and Kyoko, who fortunately survived but obviously ended up in a critical care unit. Certainly a turn of events that is far darker than anything that unfolds in the newer, more whimsical River City Girls game. But I guess being made by WayForward Technology, who regularly put out games like Double Dragon Neon and the Shantae series, what else could you expect from this modern fun development house? In terms of River City Girls Zero, the game adds to the tension near the end by featuring the player riding their bike behind the police car that is rushing the girls to hospital, with players only being able to control the two male characters in the final throes of the game. Of course, eventually, this all culminates in a final epic confrontation with Sabu, with players having to fight against this gun-wielding maniac, literally as the building burns down around them. The game ends with the boys looking on as the building where Sabu was located burning down in the background, with the police officer who believed the boys' innocence, Takayama, informing the pair that the girls are alive and recovering well. All in all, the main thing I would like to add to this is that it's great to see that this game is set for a release on modern hardware, with an official English translation on the way. It is a crying shame that so many 16-bit gems from back in the day never left Japan, but at the same time it's nice to see that change is coming when it comes to this one. As cool as all of this is though, bearing in mind that the boys are very clearly the primary protagonists in this game, it does seem rather odd that the modern title this game is being given is River City Girls Zero, as this is a very much Kunio and Ricky's story, with the end portion of the game being them fighting to avenge their fallen girlfriends. If anything, I feel that River City Couples would probably have been a better name for this one, as marketing it around the girls seems a tad misleading. But all of this is very exciting nonetheless, and I fully support the release of the game. So yeah, I hope today's video gave you a good look at yet another interesting chunk of the River City Kunio-kun franchise, building on your overall knowledge of this gem of a series. The game is Yoshihisa Kishimoto magic that often sinks beneath the average gamer's radar, but hopefully with the upcoming Western release of this one, all of this is set to finally change shortly. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of River City Girls Zero, the prequel to the River City Girls game that many of us played on modern systems. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out my videos on the likes of River City Girls, River City Ransom, or Renegade, the game that doubles up as the first Kunio-kun title. I am really enjoying exploring this gaming series in detail. If you are a seasoned appreciator of these games, let me know in the comment section down below which Kunio-kun game you would like to see spotlighted next, and be sure to give your thoughts on today's content. Every viewer Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. If you're a subscriber to this channel, then there is a jolly good chance that you're a fan of beat 'em ups. After all, in the past on here we have taken in-depth looks at many giants from the genre, including the Streets of Rage, Golden Axe and Final Fight franchises. None of these great series would have ever been conceptualized though, if it were not for one 1986 game that essentially started it all. In today's video we are going to go back in time and look at the brawler where it would all begin. A title that would go as far as to invent many of the tropes that would go on to be associated with the genre itself. In this very special episode we shall be exploring both the unique Japanese and Western versions of this game, and explaining the perplexing history about how both of these tailored experiences spawn their very own unique lines of games. In particular, we are also going to take a deep dive look at all of the Renegade specific titles, that of which were only ever made available in the West. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the confusing history of Renegade, one of the most influential games ever made. Yeah. Violence, a word that has pretty much been associated with video games since the entertainment medium began. But when it comes to fist-to-fist human combat, many of the earliest experiences recreated for video games were in the form of humble combat sports. Early examples of this include Sega's rudimentary 1976 black and white arcade game Heavyweight Champ, which simulated boxing, or Vector Beam's arcade game from 1979 known as Warrior, which featured vector-based graphics and allowed for fencing-style duels. These games are obviously vastly different combat to what will be found in future titles, but it is interesting to go back and look at the first approaches made.
By 1980, we continued to move closer to the beat-em-up genre with Samurai by Sega, a game where players are tasked with killing all opponents on screen, before fighting a boss samurai. While we take the trope of facing off against stage boss after stage boss for granted today within our video games, we rarely actually give much thought to where this concept actually came from to begin with. Well, many early Japanese game developers just so happen to be massive fans of Hong Kong martial arts films, with the 1970s delivering many classics. Many believe that bosses found in our beat-em-ups and other video games originate from the Bruce Lee martial arts movie Game of Death, a movie where he literally fights through a gauntlet of bosses. Bruce Lee's movie Enter the Dragon would also massively influence fighting in video games, with the popularity of a mysterious international martial arts tournament also weaving its way into arcade play, with the likes of Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat being some of the most prevalent in the fighting game genre, with games like Karate Champ laying the foundations for the tournament fighting genre as a whole. Everything has to start somewhere, you see, and the beat-em-up genre, as we know and love, like the tournament fighters, started out due to a video game creator's admiration.
You think it's the right time for this?
The man, of course, we are talking about is a gentleman who we have talked about to death on here about in the past. I am, of course, referring to the godfather of beat-em-ups himself, Yoshihisa Kishimoto, the genius behind the Double Dragon franchise and cooperative brawlers as a whole. But before all of this unfolded, the future legend was a Data East employee, producing early arcade laserdisc games, such as 1984's Cobra Command and 1985's Road Blaster, games that were hugely different from the future genre the man would invent. Despite these titles being far from the man's most famous work as of today, back then the games would grab a lot of attention. So much so that another company, Technos of Japan, would approach Kishimoto, proposing a meeting to discuss developing laserdisc-based games on their behalf. Kishimoto would accept the offer to meet, however during this encounter, he would make the decision to pitch a different idea entirely, one of which had nothing to do with laserdiscs whatsoever. During this discussion, Kishimoto would bring to the table an idea of creating a completely unique game that was different to anything that had been created previously in history. The concept he had in his head was a game that was inspired by unique elements indeed, in that he would pitch the idea of a quirky, semi-autobiographical game, with a character in it based on himself from his high school years, who constantly gets into fights on a daily basis. Kishimoto recalls a rough period in his life unfolding that was triggered by a girl who dumped him in high school, so wanted to combine elements of this narrative with his love for Hong Kong martial arts movies, resulting in a title that would be known as Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun, a game that functioned differently to anything that came before it, with gameplay never seen before, allowing for knockdown, drag-out fights. This was a far cry from other martial arts inspired games from the period, such as Kung Fu Master from 1984, that featured simple one-hit kills. Kunio-kun on the other hand required players to hit opponents many times, meaning they had to literally beat them up, coining the term beat 'em up. The game was also completely different to everything that came before it, due to the title featuring environments that were scrolling arena-like spaces, with action being presented from a perspective that allowed for more strategy and combat than with any game that had come prior. Directly translated, Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun means hot-blooded tough guy Kunio, with Kunio being the star of this new game. The game featured a story of this high school delinquent standing up against a series of rival gangs, that of which constantly target his fellow friend and classmate Hiroshi. The game was beyond revolutionary in that apart from allowing characters to move horizontally and vertically across the game's arenas, the game's combat was so developed that players could punch, kick, grab, charge, throw and stomp on enemies, a huge amount of options for a 1986 title. Further to this would be the first game in history where fighters could perform combo attacks, allowing gamers to replicate the high intensity of martial arts cinema like never before. Each stage in the game features a 3-screen playfield where players must take out every single enemy on the stage, After clearing the train station level and moving on to the second one, gamers must take out some opponents who ride motorcycles, with motorbike riding opponents consistently appearing across the beat 'em up genre for years to come. Something else you may notice, like the Bruce Lee movie Game of Death, every stage ends with a boss fight. Bosses are identified by the fact that they lay in wait in the stage background until a certain number of their cronies have been taken out, before jumping into action themselves. Stage 3 sees Kunio take on a girl gang led by the large rotund Misuzu, a character who would recently resurface as a stage boss in the River City Girls video game. The old school arcade game culminates in the Yakuza headquarters, with the game's final boss being the gun-wielding Sabu. Players who manage to defeat him witness Kunio exiting the building to be congratulated by Hiroshi and his fellow classmates, bringing this historical game to a close. Well, kind of at least, as the arcade game loops allowing players to carry on building on their high score. Now, that was the game the Japanese got, but what for the West? Higher-ups would make the decision that a video game about Japanese high school brawling and the Yakuza was not necessarily commercially viable for the West, and the game would need a whole new coat of paint for a different market, with a completely new story hook. A decision was made to create a graphically altered version of Kunio-kun, one of which was heavily inspired by the 1979 movie The Warriors, which made perfect sense when you think about it, when we bear in mind that the hit movie literally featured a plot that included various different gangs beating one another up. The game's story would also be altered to feature a plot of a hero rescuing his girlfriend, who is held captive by a mob boss. Both the visual aesthetics and the story of this altered version would both be highly influential on the beat 'em up genre in their own rights, with many games in the future sharing elements that were first introduced in Renegade. In the opening stage, for example, the graffiti-covered vandalised underground train would become staple scenery in many games to come, as would the what I can only describe as whip-wielding hookers appearing in stage 3. A style of enemy sprite that would go on to appear in pretty much every single beat 'em up ever made going forward. Renegade has as much to answer for as the original Kunio-kun in terms of influence and legacy. The following year of 1987 would see the game ported from arcades over to the Nintendo Famicom, Japan's most popular gaming platform. From my experience, I have never felt that the Nintendo version of this game is talked about anywhere near as much as the arcade game, which personally I think is a crying shame, as the Famicom port is rather impressive and introduces a range of new stages too. While obviously being graphically scaled back from the arcade and allowing for fewer enemies on screen, the game features much more scenery, such as being able to fight aboard the train and featuring brand new features completely, such as an all-new motorcycle stage where players must kick opponents off of their bikes, road rash style, which all contributes to this version's appeal. Give this title a go if you have the chance. Just like the arcade game, the title would receive a new coat of paint and be released as Renegade on the NES, obviously featuring the same style action as the Famicom version of the game. In terms of other ports, with the title being such a commercial smash hit, of course the game would eventually be converted to run on pretty much every piece of viable hardware under the sun, with much of the conversions to computers in Europe being handled and developed by Imaginesoft and published by Oceansoft, with conversions in America being developed by Software Creations, then published by Taito. A particularly decent version of the game would arrive as late as 1993 on the Sega Master System, a version that was largely based on the NES version but featured enhanced graphics and cooperative play. This version was developed by Natsume in Japan, but only released in regions where the Master System was still popular, so Europe, Australia and Brazil. As for the direct future of the beat 'em up, 1 year after producing Kunio-kun, Kishimoto would next produce Double Dragon, the game that would first introduce cooperative play and a scrolling stage-by-stage format that would become synonymous with brawlers. As for Kunio himself, the character would be used to spawn an empire in Japan, with him going on to star in many quirky sports games, along with the whole subgenre of beat 'em ups that would be chock full of RPG elements. These of course would be localised as the River City games, some of which I have covered in depth on here in the past, such as River City Ransom and River City Girls for example. Kunio is still a big deal in Japan. But while Kunio-kun games are ultra significant to video game history, with River City Girls 2 currently in development, what for the Renegade brand that was created bespoke for the West? Well, believe it or not, Ocean Software, the British publisher who had previously brought Renegade to home computer formats, would take advantage of the brand in order to create multiple sequels that had nothing to do with the legendary Kishimoto or Technos of Japan. So let's see what else the Renegade brand has on offer. In 1988, the very same year Double Dragon 2 would hit arcades, under Ocean's Imagine Software license, Renegade's sequel known as Target Renegade would be born. Released for various formats, the game would feature a cover of a topless Street Fighter performing a flying kick through a window. The image appears to be based on a picture taken of martial arts legend Joe Louis, that was featured on the book that he published known as The World's Greatest Fighter Teaches You How to Master Bruce Lee's Fighting System. So as you can see, Bruce Lee ties into this narrative once more. The game that appeared on multiple formats, including being published by Taito on the NES, is often considered a fan favourite amongst microcomputer owners, with the basic beat 'em up offering a respectable experience that features the plot of a character known as Renegade who seeks revenge against a local crime kingpin named Mr. Big for murdering his brother Matt. Depending on which version of the game you play, the title varies between being 1 or 2 player, and in some versions Renegade's brother Matt is being held hostage as opposed to actually being murdered to death. Renegade in this game continues to wear warriors-like apparel consisting of pairing a leather vest jacket with a pair of jeans. Target Renegades is a title that is often appreciated by home computer format users for being an early 1988 release that featured many great things the first Renegade game on many formats did not. This includes the use of full scrolling background stages along with new enemies and weapons. This is all paired with a great soundtrack that was composed by Gary Biasilo for the computer versions, and none other than Tim Folin for the NES version, the Brit behind many legendary video game soundtracks, such as Lemmings and most notably Plock, a video game soundtrack that is so impressive Shigeru Miyamoto did not believe that the Super Nintendo was capable of producing such good music. The game was extremely varied for what it was, and certainly a lot more respectable than the majority of crap that seemed to be pumped out by Ocean Software at the time. In fact, for those who have nostalgia for Target Renegade, in 2006 an unofficial remake of the Spectrum version was released for Windows, expanding the multiplayer elements to allow 6 simultaneous players. Nice. 1 year after the release of Target Renegade, 1989 would see the third and final installment in the Renegade series released, which would literally be named Renegade 3 The Final Chapter. Published under the Imagine label once more, this game was exclusive to home computer formats, showing up on the Amstrad CPC, ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64 and MSX. Bearing in mind which hardware the game was produced for, I would imagine that Renegade 3 was likely a European exclusive. However, I am more than happy to be corrected. Interestingly, magazines at the time heaped a ton of praise on the game, with Crash magazine going as far to give it a 91%, and C+VG giving it 84%. Fans on the whole though have traditionally derided this single player game though, which environmentally does little to resemble the previous games in the series. If you thought that Double Dragon 3 has a stupid plot and design compared to its predecessors, then Renegade 3 makes the third Double Dragon game look sensible in comparison. In the title, as usual, players take control of Renegade, but this time he bizarrely has to travel back in time to save his girlfriend. The game in many ways is ridiculous as you fight your way through stages taking on Captain Cavemen and dinosaurs before heading on to Egypt to take on mummies and other mythical foe. Further to this, action progresses to a medieval setting before action finally leads us to space. Yes, that's right, a series that started out about a Japanese high school student defending his friend from gangs eventually devolved into this bizarre Euro trash, kind of based on the Warriors, that looks and feels like a poor man's Double Dragon 3 tribute act. How the mighty Renegade brand had fallen. While Ocean Software would decide to mutilate the Renegade license just 3 years into the franchise's existence, there is no denying whatsoever how influential both the original Kunio-kun game was, as well as its Renegade skin. Yoshihisa Kishimoto's work created massive strides in the world of video games, with the man single-handedly establishing the entire beat-em-up genre with the creation of this game, then soon after, Double Dragon. Kishimoto is the Shigeru Miyamoto of the beat-em-up world. Without this ambitious title, there would be no Double Dragon, no River City, Golden Axe, Final Fight or Streets of Rage. So many franchises have so much to be thankful for when it comes to this benchmark title. Renegade, aka Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun, really is one of the most influential games ever made. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad and bizarre confusing story of Renegade. Let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of today's video and which beat-em-ups you would be keen for me to cover in the future. I've barely scratched the surface of the Kunio series. If you enjoyed today's video, if you have not done so already, I would massively appreciate it if you would click that subscriber button and ring that notification bell so that I can ensure my upcoming content makes it straight to your devices. Finally, I would like to give a huge thank you to the kind people who back my work over on Patreon, assisting me to continue to make videos on retro gaming history on a full-time basis. So, special thank yous go out to Sebastian Velez, A Murder of Crows, Carl John. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. When it comes to the world of video games, most non-video game licensed properties have a solid history of under-delivering when it comes to entering the gaming world. During the classic era of the Turtles, however, the Turtles franchise would end up putting out a cornucopia of quality content. Turtles video games are some of the most fondly remembered titles of the late 80s through to the mid 90s, with all-time greats such as Turtles Arcade and Turtles in Time under the franchise's belt. To this day, gamers respect and fondly remember these classics, leading some fans to go as far as programming their own games paying tribute to these wonderful days. Perhaps the best known example of this is probably Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Rescue Palooza, a huge fan game featuring a huge roster of characters to choose from that took influence from various classic Turtles titles. The high quality fan made video game we are looking at today though has somehow slipped almost completely under the radar, with not even a long play or let's play being present online to show gamers what this is all about. In this video, we shall be taking an in-depth look at this rather underappreciated gem, which comes in the form of a quirky fan game that deserves way more attention. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga, a Game Boy inspired video game. Yeah! When it comes to the world of the classic era of the Ninja Turtles, as mentioned earlier, there are plenty of great games featuring this awesome foursome that are out there to appreciate. While probably the arcade and home console titles appear to receive the most love and admiration today, the brand would also see the release of an amazing little trilogy of games on the 8-bit monochrome Nintendo Game Boy. Perhaps it is the lack of colour with these games and overall simplicity compared to their home console counterparts that results today in these games' stronger points being somewhat undersung. But there is no denying that each of them did bring something different to Nintendo's popular handheld system. While most do not give these titles perhaps the appreciation they deserve, a gentleman by the name of Oscar Celestini obviously feels quite differently. Oscar, a man who was born in Italy in 1984, grew up both watching the Turtles and playing the Game Boy, eventually choosing the interesting career choices of working as a cartoonist, colorist illustrator, and someone who dabbles in both pixel art and video game development. The man has worked for the likes of DC Comics and others under his belt, but it would be this indie game developer's Turtles passion project that grabbed my attention to inspire me to make this video today. You see, Oscar had made the rather unique decision to create a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video game for PC that features graphics that are inspired by those that could be found on the Game Boy. Oscar explains that he has loved the Turtles since he was just 5 years old, and felt this was a great way to both celebrate and express his love for the franchise. The man envisioned a simple old school platformer with graphics that offered just 4 colours on the screen in order to try and give it that old school Game Boy sort of feel. Now for me personally, this was one of those games that I discovered by accident through browsing on the information superhighway. At first glance, looking at this project, it simply led me to assume it had never actually been completed, as it is somewhat rare to try and look up long plays or let's play footage of a game on YouTube and get no results in return. Clicking Oscar's very own video game trailer though provided me with a download link necessary to access the full game, and what a fun little title Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga would actually be. The moment you boot this game up, the game's great music created by Gianluca Pappalardo begins to blast out of the PC speakers, instantly suggesting that players may be in for a treat. The game offers a basic Game Boy-esque introduction that depicts the Turtles in their live-action movie form. An interesting stylistic choice for the title, considering none of the big games released in the 90s opted to feature the Turtles movie designs over the likes of either their comic book or animated TV show counterparts. Oscar Celestini comments that he opted to create all the sprites and backgrounds for the game in line with the style of the 1990 movie, an artistic decision that he made purely on the basis that this piece of Turtles media was his all-time favourite. Between stages there are even cutscenes that help progress the story, with the first of these suggesting that Shredder has kidnapped Splinter. The images that were collated for the game, along with the title's unique story, were both created for the game by Simone Granata. As for this title's gameplay, as mentioned earlier, the game offers good, wholesome, solid 2D side-scrolling fun, similar to that of which can be found in the first 2 Turtles Game Boy games from back in the day. Although, with it being a Game Boy inspired PC game, the creator did make some choices to make the title feel more comfortable when being played on modern hardware. For example, the game plays in a 16:9 aspect ratio, which is of course the perfect shape for modern PC screens, and gamers are given a choice of visual styles between black and white, green monochrome, or a choice of whether or not to add arcade-like scanlines. Personally, for most of my play experience, I opted to play scanline free in monochrome green, as that style choice felt the most Game Boy-like to me, so therefore I was most comfortable with those particular visuals. The game takes an obvious leaf out of many previous Ninja Turtles video game playbooks, in that players have the ability to switch between all 4 Turtles at any point during a stage. Like the original Turtles NES game back in the day, each of the heroes in house shells have their own independent life bars, so when one is running low on health, it is often wise to switch one out for another to avoid a game over. The Turtles appear to vary in that they each have a different weapon with slightly varying reaches. However, from my observations, the differences were mainly aesthetic. Controlling the green team, players must platform through 5 different stages with even bonus levels in between, all of which we are going to cover now. When beginning to move through the game's first stage, players will likely quickly note that they are in the sewers, and that there are foot soldiers and mousers laced through the level that can be taken out by the use of one quick, satisfying slash. Gamers with a keen ear will notice the epic music that can be heard in the background, which is an awesome remix of the first stage music from the original 1989 NES Turtles game, offering up an awesome new chiptune rendition. In fact, most of the great music in this game are updated tracks from Turtles games of the past. It is awesome to hear and very nostalgic. Throughout the stage, there are multiple layers of platforming and ladders to ascend. These platforms are littered with pickups and collectibles, with some being located in smashable crates. Items you can collect include ninja stars that can be thrown, pizzas that of course replenish health, and turtle shells that give players additional points. There are also 20 ooze canisters that can be found throughout the entire game, that can be gathered as an additional challenge for those who have experience playing this one.
At the end of the first stage, players have the opportunity to take on aerial laser shooting opponent Baxter Stockman, who does not offer too much of a challenge. Between stages, as mentioned earlier, the game also features minigames. These bonus levels are beatable by successfully throwing ninja stars at oncoming foot soldiers for 30 straight seconds. If players are able to keep this momentum up for a solid half a minute, they are rewarded with a whole pizza that sees their entire team's health replenished. This much needed prize makes these bonus levels particularly tense, especially nearing the end of a game, where getting life back can feel like a make or break situation. Knowing that every time I won it increased my chances of beating the game, I certainly got a lovely dopamine hit every time I completed one of these. There is also a stage that features a Manhattan skyscraper theme that requires a lot more jumping than the first level, including needing to jump over bonfires and later jumping from actual building to building. This stage culminates in a boss fight against the iconic duo of Rocksteady and Bebop, the bumbling but slightly more threatening version of Bulk and Skull. The game's challenge steps up massively on stage 3, where I gained my first few game overs throughout the stage. The reason as to why this area is more death-inducing than those seen previously is that the area is laced with ninja traps, such as spikes that shoot through the floors and walls, resulting in the creation of lots of turtles kebab skewers for players who don't know what they are doing. Navigating to the end of this portion though allows players to encounter a boss battle against franchise favourite Slash, who is always cool to see. Stage 4 sees gamers move through a more mountainous region, which sees the introduction of laser shooting rock soldiers into the game, which culminates with a boss battle against Krang, before finally moving on to the 5th and final stage, which of course is the legendary Technodrome, the last challenge setting of various Turtles games from the classic era of the franchise. As one would expect, there are more traps and enemies here than any other place in the game, with even maze-like elements that involve teleportation placed within to cause a spot of disorientation in the final throes of this awesome little game. The last level also marks the only stage in the game where 2 separate boss battles take place, the first of which is a rematch against Krang, this time using his android body, then finally against the franchise's primary antagonist, Shredder himself, who rather annoyingly killed me on my first attempt, so I had to play this one credit game from scratch all over again. I must say though, I did appreciate the lack of respawns, as overall I feel it added to the game's tension, and it was fun memorising the patterns in order to beat this relatively short fan-made experience. All in all, I must say that I was thoroughly impressed with what Oscar Celestini and his small team were able to come up with, creating a rather interesting passion project which you can feel the love exuding from. I enjoyed every minute of this one, and I am quite frankly baffled it has not been talked about more in the past. The game seems to have been completed back in May 2018, and appears to have had very little in the way of media coverage. In fact, as mentioned near the beginning of this video, I seem to be the first YouTuber, to my knowledge at least, to cover this game in any capacity whatsoever, as there aren't even any Let's Plays or long plays up that feature the game. Bearing all of this in mind, this title in my opinion is the very definition of a hidden gem, and considering that Oscar has made it free for all to play, I jolly well think people should be experiencing this game. Overall, I think it's a wonderful little title that brought a smile to my face, so why not click the link in the description to give it a download yourself. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga, an awesome Game Boy inspired Turtles game that can be experienced using PC hardware. If you yourself are aware of great fan games like this that have somehow slipped beneath the gaming radar, then I and others would adore it if you could point us all in the right direction in the comment section down below. If you would like more videos covering underrepresented gaming content, or are just a lover of fighting games, wrestling or beat 'em ups, then consider subscribing to Top Hat Gaming Man right here on YouTube. I upload 2 new videos every single week designed for your entertainment. Finally, if you want even more content and would like to see some of my videos before the rest of the world, then all of my Patreon backers currently have access to my coverage of the confusing history of Renegade, the first ever beat 'em up, and River City Girls Zero, the River City Girls prequel that is set to come to the Nintendo Switch shortly. Not only that, but you receive a credit and a shout out for your kind support for what I do. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. If you're a long-term viewer of this channel, then you would have likely seen my countless videos covering the many wonderful video games that would see release throughout the classic era of the Ninja Turtles franchise. If people think of Turtles video games, it is often one of these titles. However, after the Turtles TV show was cancelled, there was no more games from the series at all until the year 2003. In today's episode, we are going to take a deep dive look at the grand return of these superheroes, how things were changed, how the new era was received, and most importantly, check out one of the first video games that would accompany this major reboot. How does this video game, simply titled Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, stand up against its many glorious predecessors? Let's find out. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of the return of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the first Game Boy Advance game. Yeah! To fully grasp the context of today's tale, I guess it is important to recap what had happened prior to the release of this game. As discussed on here many times before, the Turtles brand was a cultural phenomenon that would print money the world over, with the 1987 television series that preceded the comic books resulting in huge toy and merchandise sales, as well as smash hit box office live action movies. When it comes to products aimed at children though, everything tends to have a shelf life. So the Turtles audience forever grown
I don't
older,
think we're supposed to do that.
By 1996, the original animated show that popularised the franchise would finally be cancelled. In its place, just 1 year later, a live-action Saban-created Power Rangers-inspired reboot would emerge, which we covered last month on the channel. This incarnation, known as the Next Mutation, was so poorly received that only one season would ever be created, ultimately putting the franchise to bed completely for now. Going forward, 6 years would pass with no new Turtles content appearing on television. However, this would all finally change in 2003, when another new TV concept would be delivered. News of this would first break in May of 2002, when it was announced that for kids entertainment and the original creators of the Turtles characters and comics themselves, Mirage Studios, would be collaborating to produce a new Turtles animation series that would be animated by Studio Dongwoo. This deal was struck after Lloyd Goldfine, the man who would head the project, suggested for kids go straight to Mirage for guidance with a new Turtles cartoon. Goldfine had known the Ninja Turtles since the original Mirage Studios comics, and declared he loved the charm of the cartoon, but much preferred the idea of Turtles raised to be ninja assassins, and was interested in using said plot while also creating something family friendly. Turtles co-creator Peter Laird and Mirage CEO Gary Richardson approved Goldfine's pitch, and Mirage remained very close during development, with Laird reading every outline and draft of the script, and approving most of the character designs. This new animated series that would begin airing in February 2003 would differ in tone greatly from what was brought to the table between 87 and 96, in that rather than delivering programming that was cheesy and slapstick, the tone with this new series would be closer to the original comic books. The 2003 Turtles was designed to be a show that was more authentic to the source material, with a strong emphasis on action and themes of familial bonds prioritising above all else. This would result in a show that was much more grown up and adult orientated than all prior TV adaptations, which meant while the show was still perfectly appropriate for a newer, younger audience, this new Turtles was still capable of drawing older fans back too. This series, that would adapt a large scope of story arcs from the comics, even delivered an art style that was more faithful to the print media too, with the Turtles looking much tougher in this animated series than they had been drawn prior. This new, or should I say really old, direction for the Turtles brand massively paid off, as the first of these series would be popular and critically acclaimed enough to end up receiving many more installments. In fact, 2003 Turtles would be such a smash hit that it would lead to a long and prosperous era for the brand, with 6 TV series of this incarnation being produced, and even a feature-length animated movie being created in 2009. This was a great era for the heroes in house shells, so with great success comes many video games. with the first of these popping up as early as 2003 itself. October 21st of this very year would see the release of not one, but two brand new Turtles games. These were released simultaneously, both taking the simple name Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, meaning both of these games are often referred to simply as Turtles 03. One of these games appeared on the PlayStation 2, GameCube, Xbox and PC, and functioned as a 3D beat-em-up. We shall certainly be looking at this game in depth on the channel someday soon, but in today's content we are going to be focusing on the other game that saw release that year. This other game was a classic style 2D beat-em-up developed by Konami for the Game Boy Advance, thus meaning that the game is from the very same genre as the likes of Turtles Arcade and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, perhaps the two most legendary games in the whole entire franchise. So without further ado, let's analyse this game and see how well it stands up against the well-known classics that had come before it. When you first power the Game Boy Advance on to play this game, one of the first things you will probably notice is the insanely high quality of the music and audio that this game delivers. Many GBA soundtracks sound terrible, however Konami with this game appear to have gotten the best out of the system. But what for the gameplay itself? The title that is clearly based on the look of the new TV series allows gamers to not only choose a difficulty setting, but like many Turtles games of old, lets users choose which of the four they wish to play as. Where this game differs instantly from others in the series before it though, is that each of the foursome have their own unique set of levels that need to be completed. Meaning, much like a Mega Man game, a personal playthrough will differ depending on which turtle you opt to play as first. Before any action is even underway in this one, there is a lot of character dialogue to read to help set the story and the scene, which is I guess a running theme throughout the game, with a lot more story focus to what players would be used to from either console or arcade games from back in the day. I guess the different pacing though should probably be expected, bearing in mind how much time has shifted since the last game was released. Primary action in this one is made up of traditional side-scrolling levels with beat-em-up combat, however gameplay is occasionally mixed up to showcase other styles, which we shall soon get to. In terms of core gameplay, as you can see, this Game Boy Advance game looks every bit as good as titles you would find on the Super Nintendo or Sega Mega Drive, which is exactly what you would want as an owner of the Game Boy Advance. For me personally, the GBA was a magical device, as while on the whole I found that gaming on home consoles appeared to be moving in a direction of trying to make everything as gritty and realistic as possible, the Game Boy Advance was offering brand new games that featured playstyles of old, which was perfect for someone like myself at the time. As one would expect, each of the four turtles each had their own unique signature weapons that they can wield against enemies in the plot. And in a throwback to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, Radical Rescue for the original Game Boy, each turtle has their own custom abilities to help them traverse their environments, meaning there are more differences between the turtles than just weapons and aesthetics. The game features a plot that occurs directly after a group of Baxter Stockman's Mouser robots have destroyed the turtles' home. These robots are now in the process of attacking the turtles' new one. The turtles trace the robots back to Stockman and thus set off in pursuit to defeat him and save April O'Neil. Throughout the game, many familiar Turtles characters resurface, with the whole adventure culminating in a battle against classic villain Shredder, which we will also get to soon. If gamers opt to play as Leonardo, Act 1 occurs down in the sewers, where gamers must hack and slash their way through a series of mousers. Players can opt to attack enemies classic beat-em-up style, as well as being able to perform charged dash attacks via holding the left trigger down. To give the game a bit of a more free roaming feel, players are often presented with choices regarding to which route they would like to take, much like what could be found in the likes of Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder before this, a classic game I have covered a while back that you may want to check out my video on. Animation in the game is very solid looking, with the turtles having some great animation frames on display. The game features platforming elements as well as vertically scrolling sections to further mix up gameplay. In the sewers, aside from the mousers being present, purple dragons must also be faced off against, a gang of low-level thugs connected to the Foot Clan who have been present in the Turtles franchise ever since the first few pages
of the first ever comic book. Act 1 is over when Leonardo manages to find April O'Neil knocked out on the sewer floor, leading to another cutscene that builds on the story, which includes an appearance from Splinter. In pursuit of Stockman, Act 2 completely changes the gameplay, with Leonardo now featuring in a rail shooter section, controlling a militarised hovercraft. While this stage offers some shooty fun that is paired with lock-on mechanics, what is most impressive about this section is the ridiculously impressive graphical effects, offering stunning looking presentation for the humble GBA. After this stage, another cutscene is shown between Dr. Stockman and fellow villain Hun. Leonardo manages to get into Stockman's headquarters via a ventilation shaft, leading to more beat-em-up action. Here inside Stocktronic Industries laboratory, a number of ninjas and mousers must be taken out before finally reaching the Doctor himself. Here, Stockman sets one of his large mechanical contraptions against Leonardo, which can only be defeated by repeatedly jumping and striking the foe in the head. Still though, players must avoid this opponent's missiles and leaping stomp attacks in order to put this bad boy out of its misery. After completing this Leonardo section of the game, a scene is shown as the turtles celebrate, followed by one of Oroku Saki ordering Han to take Stockman away. Saki is of course the most well-known mantle holder of the title of the Shredder, the main antagonist of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comics and all of the related media. Raphael's section of the game starts out with him ascending to the surface to cool off after having Michelangelo get on his nerves a bit. Scenes also show what appears to be Casey Jones on the news pursuing the Purple Dragon, the same gang who accosted Raphael as soon as he makes it to the graffiti tarnished streets. Bloody dirty vandals. The night sky and vandalised buildings give this stage a very beat 'em up of old sort of feel, which is always nice to see, particularly in 2003 when games like this on the whole had become a genre of the past. Raphael has a cool charge attack that also allows him to release a flurry of kicks, giving the area an even more Streets of Rage sort of feel. Even neon lights are present to nod to this era further. The scenery is all around quality. Raphael also utilises his wall climbing ability in this stage to ascend up buildings to reach rooftops and other areas, making the stage feel large and entertaining. After clearing the first act, Raphael finally meets Casey Jones himself, who Raphael chastises for continuing to beat down criminals with hockey sticks after they are already down on the ground with no way of protecting themselves. This leads to a boss fight between Jones and the Turtle locked into a fairly small playfield, bringing back memories of Jones' appearance in Turtles Tournament Fighters for the Sega Mega Drive. Raphael wins the fight, but Jones still beats him down with a golf club afterwards. So the Turtles pursue the Vigilante to attempt to change his ways yet again. Next, the game gives players yet another break from beat-em-up gameplay, offering a motorcycle section which plays a lot like Excitebike, where gamers must ride the shell cycle and defeat Casey in a race. After the race, Casey reveals his origin story and why he wants revenge on the Purple Dragons on behalf of what they did to his father. In the final act of Raphael's section of the game, Raphael teams up with franchise favourite Casey against various gang members. Players must run a gauntlet against a large array of opponents before finally taking on the Dragon Gang leader himself, Dragonface. Once he is defeated, Raphael's part of the game is concluded. When playing as Donatello, Stockman presents Shredder with robotic foot tech ninjas to defeat the Turtles, who have the power to make themselves invisible. Raphael is captured by these ninjas before gamers take control of Donatello in the sewers, the character who can climb pipes. Here Donatello takes on Purple Dragons. Donnie is not in the sewers long though before he moves to the surface to take on more enemies on rooftops. The Turtles work out using a tracking device that Raphael is in Stocktronic's laboratory. Donatello opts to go to the lab alone due to him being most familiar with Stockman's technology. Inside the lab, it is largely platforming based above all else, but there are still beat 'em up sections laced between all of the athleticism. After Raphael is saved, the Foot Tech Ninjas are sent after Donatello, who players must navigate through a shoot 'em up section of the game, where the purple bandana wearing hero must control a hand glider to dart in and out of incoming missiles. The section can be tough, particularly when it becomes very fast. The final part of Donatello's quest sees him in a boss fight against the Foot Tech Ninjas, who are invincible while invisible. This means he must activate heat sensors in order to see and attack them, which requires a lot of luck and timing in order to be able to pull off. After a long slog though, Stockman is humiliated by Shredder once again, as he is taken away by his own creation. Playing as Michelangelo starts with a scene showing that the Turtle security perimeter has been breached, which sees the Turtles head down an abandoned subway line looking for what has caused this, leading to fights with lots of foot soldiers and eventually underground monsters. As Mikey battles his way through the underground networks, he can perform wall jumps to make it onto higher platforms to help him traverse the environment. He can also throw his weapon like a boomerang as an effective charge attack. After making it deep into these tunnels, the Turtles make their way through a hole in the wall, which they notice cannot have been made by a human lifeform. In yet more variation, Mikey rides his skateboard through a long tunnel. Once again, like the rail shooter section earlier in the game, the graphics are very impressive and remind me of Sewer Shark of all things. Not really a graphical style that is present much on the GBA, so a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Who doesn't love Sewer Shark? Players progress into a cavern stage full of lava, platforming obstacles and large blue monstrous opponents with a lot of hit points. In fact, there are a range of different large monsters down here that must be taken out. Eventually the Turtles make it into the lab to discover the foot geneticist has been creating all of the monsters located in the cavern, which results in Mikey's boss battle against a range of different disgusting foe. Once all 4 Turtle scenarios have finally been beaten, a 5th one finally opens up where players get to take on Shredder. After tons and tons of dialogue, Splinter reveals to the Turtles, Casey Jones and April, who Shredder actually is and why he must be defeated. The Shredder stage delivers what you would expect really, many enemies, lasers and other obstacles. Basically the Technodrome of this game. Being a beat 'em up, it even has a lift section, which outlined previously on this channel is illegal not to include in a beat 'em up. Players eventually face off against the looming Han before finally making it to Shredder himself, who as one would expect has a hell of a range of attack patterns in comparison to previous enemies, making him an extremely tough boss battle indeed. After winning the battle, Splinter manages to hit the finishing blow on Shredder, knocking him out the window of a multi-story building. Shredder's defeat brings the game to a close, even if an ominous image of his hand rising up is shown after the game's credits roll. Now, as demonstrated through this video, this Game Boy Advance title has a lot of upside to it, but that does not leave the game without flaws. Perhaps the biggest of these being the fact that the game offers no 2-player cooperative mode like literally every Turtles beat 'em up that had ever come out before it. Sure, an excuse could be made that the game was for the GBA, so multiplayer was less appealing, but the system did have a link cable, and it certainly did not stop Final Fight 1 from receiving cooperative beat 'em up brawling on the platform. Back on release, the game would also receive the generic criticisms that games would get at the time that featured this style of play, which would of course include the old chestnuts, this game is too short, and beat 'em ups are dated and repetitive. In 2021 though, I think many of us prefer shorter pick up and play stints to be able to fit gaming into our very busy lives, particularly on handheld systems that have been designed to be played in very short bursts anyway. Once again, moaning about beat 'em ups existing is also a very dated worldview, particularly when we take into account how beloved games like Streets of Rage 4 and River City Girls have become recently. In fact, if I was to moan about anything with regards to this game, it is that it should be more beat 'em uppy and include more brawling and less dodgy platforming. No way did this game need as much text as it received either, as sometimes the amount of dialogue really drags, but at the very least it gives players a window into this era of Turtle storylines. All in all though, I am going to have to say the game delivers a decent effort from Konami, even if the title does not offer quite the same bite as the likes of Turtles in Time. However, if you compare this title with its Game Boy predecessors, it's probably the best of the bunch. Interestingly, this would be the first of a few different Turtles games published for the Game Boy Advance, so we will be able to visit its successors along with the game's home console counterparts in future episodes. As for this 2003 title, the game helped mark an important point in the Turtles franchise's history, and helped usher in a new decent era for the brand. By this period, the classic series may have been over, but this more modern approach was beginning to look very promising indeed. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of the return of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the 2003 Game Boy Advance game. Let me know in the comments down below which Turtles game you would like me to cover next on here, and if you are new here, be sure to check out my pre-existing, already huge Turtles game playlist. I'd love to have you as one of my subscribers. Speaking of content for you to check out, my wife Lady Decade has just uploaded a new video covering the Robo 3DO, a ridiculous Japan-only device that seems to have only been manufactured so that viewers could watch adult movies. So be sure to check that messed up story out on the Lady Decade channel. To conclude, I would like to give massive thank yous to those who back my show on Patreon, helping to allow me to work on niche content like the history of certain Game Boy Advance games on a full-time basis. So without further ado, I would like to give massive shout-outs to some of my Patreon backers. So thanks go to Sebastian Velez, The Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heyo. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. As pointed out on this channel previously, we very much seem to have found ourselves in the beat 'em up renaissance period, with this genre of gaming seeing a resurgence in popularity in recent times, resulting in the release of many future classics. In terms of this particular style of brawler action, it's a great time to be alive. Speaking of beat 'em ups, this month we have received Space Jam: A New Legacy, the game, an all new retro brawler available via Xbox Game Pass, featuring characters from the upcoming Space Jam movie. In today's episode, not only are we going to take an up close look at this game, but we are going to discuss its creation and the cultural impact of Space Jam in general. The insane Looney Tunes and basketball crossover that was a favourite of kids everywhere during the mid-90s. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Space Jam: A New Legacy, a Streets of Rage style game. Yeah. To begin today's tale, we need to go all the way back to 1992 and 1993. Michael Jordan is, or at least one of the greatest basketball players in the world, resulting in the athlete getting all sorts of brand deals, including getting to feature in Nike ads alongside Looney Tune Bugs Bunny. Believe it or not, Warner Brothers, who owned the Looney Tunes brand, were extremely skeptical at the time about these advertisements, and were even slightly concerned with Nike modernising their beloved character. But the crossover between Air Jordan and Hair Jordan would go over an absolute treat with the audience, and instead would bring Bugs all new relevance. As expected from this, it would lead to further talks between Nike and Warner Brothers, but unexpectedly the project would be closed in 1993 when Jordan retired from basketball. Fortunately for the money makers, Jordan would be back in the sport in 1995, which would help lead to Space Jam. The movie that mixed live action and animation featured a ridiculous plot of a group of aliens looking to improve their amusement park, so they headed to Earth to capture the Looney Tunes to add as attractions. Trying to find a way out of a situation, the Toons noticed the aliens' small stature, so challenged them to a basketball game with their freedom at stake. But unfortunately for the Toons, the aliens infiltrate various basketball games around the USA, literally stealing talent from Charles Barkley and various other high-profile NBA stars, stockpiling talent and transforming themselves into large muscular basketball monsters. Realising what a dire situation he is in, Bugs Bunny looks to recruit a professional to the team, which is where Michael Jordan comes in. After much shenanigans, the Looney Tunes managed to convince him to join their team, with the film culminating in a victory for the cartoon characters and Jordan over their extraterrestrial foe. While this film may sound extremely goofy, which I guess it was, kids absolutely adored it, leading to a new spike in popularity for the Looney Tunes brand the world over. The movie was a box office hit that would create the perfect synergy to not only breathe new life into Warner Brothers brand, but even basketball itself. In my country of the United Kingdom, for example, no one has really ever given a crap about basketball, and it is rarely ever featured on television. But for a short time period, Space Jam would shine a spotlight on the sport, with myself and my younger brother asking for our first ever basketball. And our father even put up a basketball hoop for us in the garden. Space Jam led to kids trying basketball in regions where basketball was not really even a thing. That's how culturally impactful Space Jam was, and I feel many overlook that today. The franchise even had its own video game produced by Sculptured Software, the same developers who brought to us WWF In Your House. This game was available on the Sony PlayStation, Sega Saturn and PC, and was a simple 3-on-3 basketball game that simulated matches between the Toons and the monster aliens. Just by coincidence, this team had already developed a Looney Tunes basketball game prior, Looney Tunes B-Ball, but sadly for the Space Jam game, it would be heavily criticised for falling short of delivering the gameplay quality found in other basketball games from the period. After this point, Space Jam would slowly fade into our pasts, with it being remembered as somewhat of a fun kids movie. This of course would be until 25 years later, bringing us to present day with the movie's sequel finally set for release, subtitled A New Legacy. Now apparently a sequel has been in the works for years, with deals falling through, with Michael Jordan making a return, and even discussions with athletes from other sports such as Tiger Woods and Tony Hawk's, changing the sporting theme of these crossovers. Finally though, a deal has been made with basketball star LeBron James.
Looks like
The plot of the movie, rather fittingly for this video, revolves around LeBron and his youngest son Dom, who dreams of becoming a video game developer, rather than following in his father's footsteps. But somehow they find themselves trapped in the Warner 3000 serververse, a virtual space ruled by a tyrannical AI by the name of Algae Rhythm, a foe I personally have to do battle with on a daily basis. LeBron teamed with the Tunes to save his son, which inevitably leads to a basketball game, this time against a game of powered up virtual avatars. At first glance, I have to say I really like the premise of this plot, as spending a period working as a school teacher in modern times, there has certainly been a cultural shift, with most children no longer idolising athletes,
what do you
and
think,
instead
Dog? This is
wanting
the room
to be
I hate
professional
to admit
gamers
defeat, but
or gaming
he's
YouTube
right.
content creators when they grow up. With a tyrannical algorithm certainly being one of the biggest foes that stands in their way. So obviously a movie about basketball and video games of course would receive a video game to call its own. An old school style beat 'em up that would feature a plot line that shares similarities with the new movie that sees LeBron, Bugs and Lola Bunny fight their way through hordes of enemies on their way to confront Algae. Back in December of last year, the marketeers behind Space Jam: A New Legacy would run a competition where they would task the franchise's fanbase with submitting their ideas for an all-new Space Jam video game, with both a children's and adults competition category being included. In the youth category, Narayan would win from India.
where do you
and
think
in
you're
the adult
going?
category, a man named Ricky would win, who proposed an old school arcade beat 'em up where the characters used a basketball.
Darn, this is the hate to
which ultimately would be the game that would become a reality. So thanks for that, Ricky. The game is available as of now as a perk for everyone who is signed up to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. But those who have yet to procure a Game Pass, the game will be free to play for all as of July 15th, 2021, acting as a promotional video game to help promote the release of the movie. Now for a completely free game, I'll be honest, I was not expecting much at all from this one. The title is technically no more than an advertisement, however, I have to admit, the game far surpassed my expectations, offering a classic arcade-like experience far above what one would expect from a game they are literally giving away for free. After offering an introductory scene that shares a similar story to the upcoming movie, the game functions as a beat 'em up that up to 3 players can enjoy cooperatively. The game features a high quality old school pixel art style, a style of which admittedly was not popular at all when the first Space Jam movie saw release, as we had moved on to the Sony PlayStation and Nintendo 64. Then again, that did not stop the last game being sprite based, I guess, even though it was based on a movie that mixed 2D animation with the real world, so a 2D game didn't really make sense. But bizarrely, this Space Jam game harkens back to a period way before even the 1996 Space Jam movie actually existed, the golden era of arcade beat 'em ups. but I am guessing they opted for this style based on the fact that both pixel art and beat 'em ups are popular again now, rather than them being popular at the time of the first Space Jam. After all, this game is based around the new legacy, not the film we all grew up with. So, pedantry aside, what does this wacky basketball related media actually bring to the table? Well, in this game our trio of playable heroes must fight through the waves of rogue AI on a quest to collect 4 pieces of legacy code within the Warner Bros. Server in order to access our G's location. The legacy code is located on floppy disks found throughout this short game selection of stages, which players must gather to progress. As expected, combat in the game is fairly simplistic, but fortunately very intuitive. You can execute many of the style of attacks you would expect from a beat 'em up, including flurries by tapping the X button, as well as the ability to perform jumping kicks and other maneuvers. Special attack can also be performed that cost players health. For example, Bugs Bunny can perform Mike Haggar's spin attack from Final Fight, so a nice nod to beat 'em ups of old there. Speaking of the combat, you can even launch opponents into the air and perform satisfying air juggles that allow players to deal extra damage and earn additional points. Apart from all of this, by far the game's most unique combat mechanic of all is of course the use of the basketball itself in skirmishes. A basketball is permanently available on the screen, which can be picked up and thrown at enemies as a weapon, with a Mega Man-like charge attack also being available, which can inflict even further damage. What makes the use of the basketball even more layered in this one is that certain enemies can catch the basketball and launch it straight back at players, dealing damage to our heroes. So it's important for games to stay on their toes in order to dodge these sometimes unexpected attacks. Building on the use of the basketball even further, in cooperative play, gamers can even pass the ball amongst themselves, and even double jump to perform slam dunks on enemies. The game really is a very adequate movie tie-in, and does a great job of tying the world of video games, Looney Tunes, and basketball all together. The very 3 premises the new movie is set to be based around. Through the game's selection of short but sweet stages, players have the opportunity to take on a varied range of enemies with varying attack patterns that help mix up this game's unique action. If you have played a lot of beat 'em ups, you will know exactly what to expect in this regard. Further from all of this, the game offers 3 bosses who gamers must manage to overcome, all of which I imagine will likely show up in this upcoming Space Jam movie. These fights that occur against opponents with extended life bars first take place against a demonic looking winged basketball player known as the Brow, which according to my research is the nickname of an NBA player known as Anthony Davis, who became infamous for having a unibrow. I know very little about basketball, but I have to admit, I am very amused by this story. The next boss fight occurs against a female opponent who is part serpent in the game, known as the White Mamba, which is a nickname shared by Diana Taurasi, a woman who many view as the greatest female basketball player of all time. According to my research, the WNBA is not very popular at present, so maybe her placement in Space Jam has potential to get more eyes on the women's product. After all, the first Space Jam movie even got me to look at basketball. Finally, we take on every YouTube content creator's worst nightmare, Algae Rhythm himself, whose varied attacks and ability to mix it up proves to make him the longest and toughest boss fight in the game. How realistic to real life. Despite all of this though, after some minor perseverance, most people can probably easily beat this short but fun beat 'em up game. Hell, including deaths and restarting stages, I completed the game in 40 minutes, and that was in a household with 2 screaming children. So I would imagine most people could probably beat the game, even though according to Xbox achievements, only about 5% of players were able to do so. What's wrong with people these days? After finishing the main game, players are then able to unlock Boss Rush mode, where all of the bosses in the game must be beaten back to back using just 1 life, which is certainly a lot more challenging in my opinion than the main game itself. So there is some additional content for those who want to persist with a playthrough even further. To top it off, for completionists out there, there are also a selection of cards to unlock, each of which power up your fighters in different ways. So there is enough here to keep gamers coming back for more who truly want a little more out of this thing. For a free-to-play game, I have to admit that Space Jam: A New Legacy delivers a much more polished game than I was first expecting. that features overall fun but throwback gameplay, with even some completely fresh mechanics thrown in with how players use the basketball. A new legacy was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one, and considering this game will be available completely for free shortly, then I advise everybody who owns an Xbox console to at least give this one a go. In fact, if you don't want to take my word for it, my friend Chad has also covered the game tonight. So if you want a second opinion, why not see what he has to say? Speaking of Space Jam, is this game the same caliber of the likes of River City Girls or Streets of Rage 4? Well, obviously not. But for a game that is literally being given away, Space Jam A New Legacy is legitimately pretty awesome, with some great old school arcade vibes to it. We truly are living in the beat-em-up renaissance period, and I simply cannot wait to see what the rest of this fantastic era brings to us. Brawlers are back. Yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of Space Jam A New Legacy, the new Streets of Rage style Space Jam game. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this video, and if you have got round to experiencing this game yourself, then let us all know what you thought of it. If you love beat 'em ups, I have an entire playlist covering the history of this genre for you to go back and enjoy. So if you are new here, make sure you smash that subscriber button and ring that notification bell to never miss a video. Further to this, if you want more new content from the House of Top Hat, my wife, Lady Decade, has just uploaded a video to her channel covering the story of the two UK variants of the NES. So subscribe to her gaming content if you want some more obscure hardware trivia. Finally, I would like to give a warm thank you to all of the godly people who choose to back my fairly niche channel over on Patreon, allowing me to make content like this full time. So with that said, I would like to give thank yous and shout outs to Sebastian Villa,
Your DNA is probably already in a database. You didn't have to provide a sample or give consent, but the unique sequence of A's, T's, G's, and C's that make you you are searchable nonetheless. So if you committed a heinous crime and left a bit of your DNA, law enforcement could search it in a database and identify you. This video includes a discussion of serious crimes, which may be disturbing for some viewers, so I wanted to let you know that up front. But I think it's necessary to talk about these crimes in some detail for reasons that will become apparent. In the small town of Visalia, California in the mid-1970s, one of the state's most prolific criminals got his start. He repeatedly broke into houses and stole small items like cash, coins, and jewelry. He was dubbed the Visalia Ransacker, but soon his crimes escalated.
6 months later, in 1976, he moves up to Sacramento, and over the course of the next 3 years is moving all across Northern California, committing numerous sexual assaults, over 50 sexual assaults.
Here, he was called the East Area Rapist.
The police are saying lock up tight. Sacramento's infamous East Area Rapist may still be in town.
And then in 1979, he moves down to Southern California, starting in Santa Barbara, and starts killing. And he was known as the original Night Stalker in Southern California.
Variously known as the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker, these were brutal, meticulously planned crimes that spanned numerous California counties between 1976 and 1986.
Police believed that all of these crimes were committed by the same person, now known as the Golden State Killer. How was it known that these were committed by the same person?
Investigators were relying on MO. MO, modus operandi, is basically how a criminal will commit a crime.
I was wearing some type of a mask or a hood. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt.
The Golden State Killer had a very distinctive MO.
What he would do is he would break into a house with a gun, a house with a man and a woman. He would tie them up, tell the man, I'm going to put plates on your back. If I hear those plates move, I'm going to kill your wife and then kill you. Take the wife into another room and sexually assault her. Then he would go through the house for however much time, eating, stealing stuff, stealing little things or whatever, and then he would leave.
How was he not caught based on fingerprint evidence?
Well, he didn't leave his fingerprints. He always wore a mask. He always had gloves on. This was an offender that did everything to prevent himself from being caught.
The Golden State Killer has been linked to at least 12 murders, 50 rapes, and a string of burglaries throughout California.
Derek, how's it going?
How you doing?
Good. So we supply DNA sequencing solutions to the forensic laboratories that process crime scene DNA. At a crime scene, there's typically less than a nanogram of DNA left, and it's usually degraded. Right, so it breaks down.
Why is there so little at a crime scene? A nanogram?
Yes.
That's insane.
Yes.
There's no accident that he stops in 1986. 1986 is when the first DNA case of a murder case is actually solved with DNA. And I think he's following that, and he's saying, you know what I'm doing here, I'm leaving my DNA. I can't do this anymore.
Investigator Paul Holes tracked the Golden State Killer for decades.
He couldn't account for DNA technology, and that really was his big mistake. That was the critical mistake. He left his DNA all over California. And it turns out that 3 of the cases, I had 3 sexual assault kits, and that's where I got the Golden State Killer's DNA from Northern California.
But having the unknown killer's DNA wasn't enough. They needed to match it to a known sample. In 1990, the FBI started work on what would become a national genetic database. It mainly stores DNA profiles from convicted criminals and persons of interest. It's called the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS for short. In each of your cells, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes, one from your mom and one from your dad. And at particular places on some chromosomes, there are short sections of DNA that repeat, like AATG, 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 and so on. These are called short tandem repeats, or STRs, and different people have different numbers of repeats. Forensic labs produce STR profiles by counting up the number of repeats at each location. Initially, there were only 13 places on the DNA where STRs were counted, but in 2017, that was expanded to 20. It feels to me like that's not that much information.
It isn't.
But the chances of 2 people having the exact same number of repeats at all locations is incredibly small. The CODIS database now contains over 18 million STR profiles.
Golden State Killer's DNA profile has been up at the National DNA Database that's run by the FBI called CODIS since 2001 and has been searching ever since with no hits. We did Interpol searching, trying to search other countries' DNA databases, thinking, well, maybe he came from out of the country. That's why, after all this time, we have yet to be able to identify him. And obviously, we didn't get any hits.
But genetic sequencing technology was advancing rapidly.
The Human Genome Project was completed. Since 1986, scientists had been mapping and sequencing the 3 billion nucleotides contained in the human genome. It's anticipated that
soon, private companies began offering genetic tests directly to consumers, and they provide far more genetic data than what's in the CODIS database. I traveled to Houston, Texas to visit Family Tree DNA headquarters.
We'll go in the lab and we'll start talking about the life cycle of a sample. There you go.
Thank you. These samples, what are they?
So they're cheek cells. They just scrape the inside of their cheek, they put a cap on, and they send it back to us.
It's like a robot ballet.
Yes. So for DNA extraction, we need to remove all of the protections that are on the DNA and just separate it by itself so we can do testing on that.
Instead of looking at 20 places on your DNA, these tests examine 700 to 800,000.
The Family Finder test is based on what's called a microarray. And this is what a microarray looks like. Each one of those boxes is an individual. We can fit 24 individuals on here. And within that box is about 710,000 positions of your DNA that we're measuring, we're getting data for.
710,000.
Yes, and they're called SNPs.
So hang on, that's like 710,000 individual bases, like ATGC.
Yes.
For each person, you can measure 24 on that single chip.
Correct.
The human genome consists of 3 billion bases. All people share about 99.9% the exact same DNA, which means, on average, only about 3 million bases differ from person to person. These individual letter changes are known as single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. So on there, are there a whole bunch of like little pieces of DNA then?
Yes. So what we have is a short piece of DNA that is specific to one SNP. So it's one position in the genome where we know there can be a difference.
Okay. Is there any example of a simple SNP that, confers some sort of...
Actually, blue eyes is a single base change.
Really?
Yeah.
So everyone with blue eyes has this one letter change.
Mm-hmm.
You can see now it's starting to scan the first box.
The results of your 710,000 SNPs can tell you about your geographic ancestry or possible medical conditions, but they can also quantify how related you are to someone else. The genetics of having a kid are a bit like cutting 2 decks of cards together. The resulting deck will share about half its cards with each parent, and there will be long sequences of cards which match identically sequences in each parent. Now, if this deck has a kid, well then its offspring will share only about a quarter of its cards with each grandparent, and the sections of identical cards will be shorter. And this is how it works with DNA. The more closely you're related to someone, the more DNA you share, and the longer the blocks of identical DNA are. But to compare the DNA of 2 people, you don't need to read every letter. The SNPs are sprinkled throughout the DNA roughly every 2,000 bases. So if you find long sections where the SNPs match up, you can bet that the DNA in between is identical too. By comparing hundreds of thousands of SNPs sprinkled throughout the DNA, you can see where these identical blocks start and stop, and so how much total DNA is shared.
Everywhere that is highlighted in blue is where I share DNA.
With your father?
With my father, which is exactly what you expect, because I should share DNA with him everywhere, because he gave me 50% of my DNA. So this is a second to third cousin. I have no idea who this person is. And you can see here, we are definitely not as closely related as me and my dad, because where the blue is, those are the only regions of the chromosome where we share DNA.
We all know that these genetic tests can help identify our relatives. But the question is, can you do the same thing with law enforcement databases? Can you identify family members using the CODIS database?
You can, and it's only limited to really first order and second order relatives.
That means if I'm looking for the Golden State Killer, I'm looking for either his father, his brother, or his son. We did that over and over and over again with no hits.
Why is it so limited?
Because you've only got 23 loci. If you want to do proper kinship analysis, you need to have more points assessed on that genome to see how related you really are.
We know the answer is behind a locked door, and the answer is behind the locked door of 23andMe and Ancestry.com. We know that they have millions of profiles. Somebody related to him, a second cousin, I would guess, would be in there.
Sure.
And that was very hard to deal with, that the answer is there behind this locked door.
Law enforcement is not allowed to search the databases of 23andMe and Ancestry.com, but luckily for investigators, there was another way. An independent website called GEDmatch had been set up to allow people to connect with relatives. You can upload the raw data from any of the big genetic testing companies and search for matches.
So when we initially search the GEDmatch database, our best hits come back at third cousins, which means they shared, our top hit, I think, shared about 1% of the DNA. It's very little DNA that's shared. But that's a starting data point. And theoretically, by taking multiple of these individuals that share DNA and building their family trees using traditional genealogy and public source documents like census records and obituaries and newspaper articles and findagrave.com. You build this family tree back until you get two of these relatives of the Golden State Killer. You get them to intersect, where now you see, oh, they shared great-great-grandparents together. Theoretically, Golden State Killer is a descendant from those same great-great-grandparents. So once I identify that common ancestor, it's now identifying every single descendant from those great-great-grandparents. And this becomes a huge process. People in the 1840s would typically have 15 kids. You have to identify each of those kids, and then all of their children, and then all of their children. So now we have this exponentially growing family tree.
How wide did that tree get?
I think we had over 1,000 individuals in that family tree, but we knew a lot about our offender. We were confident he was born between 1940 and 1960. We knew he was a white male. We knew he was 5'8" to 5'10". You know, he's in California. He's up in Sacramento in 1976. He's in Southern California in the 80s. We basically narrowed it down to about 5 males, and then it's just investigations.
With a suspect at their fingertips, this spring they followed him to a Sacramento area Hobby Lobby store and took a DNA sample from his car door handle. Days later, investigators recovered another DNA sample from one discarded tissue, which registered a match to DNA evidence left at one of the crime scenes.
Investigators in California say DNA evidence led them to one of the country's most notorious serial killers. Former police officer Joseph James D'Angelo was arrested yesterday, and he is believed to be the so-called Golden State Killer.
This foot screen seems to display
44 years. Countless investigators have worked it and have failed to solve it. Within 4.5 months, a team of 6 were able to figure out who the Golden State Killer was, and that was Joseph D'Angelo.
After the Golden State Killer was identified, the floodgates opened, and we were seeing every week not only single killers, but multiple killers, serial killers. Every week were being identified from cases in the 70s and 80s.
Because there's been over 70 cases now that they've solved this way, and they continue to solve them at a fairly regular rate. And I think...
Presumably that rate's just going to increase.
Yeah.
And there's going to be more because it's working, and we are going to, help find these people.
But the scary thing is, in the US, you have 100,000 cold case murders with DNA. You have more cold cases, but the ones with DNA is estimated about 100,000. There's roughly about 650,000 sexual assaults, cold cases with DNA.
This seems like a real paradigm shift.
It is. Multiple law enforcement agencies have said that this is the most revolutionary tool they've had since the adoption of the fingerprint.
With traditional DNA, it required getting a sample from the actual individual. It's a one-to-one type of process. And so these offenders who, let's say they have committed crimes and haven't been caught, and they're just living their life, and they're thinking, well, my DNA has never been taken from me. So I may have left DNA in a case that I committed back in 1975, but they've never gotten my DNA. They won't find me. But now, well, we don't have to rely upon that. Somebody distantly related to that offender has put their DNA into a database, and they have to start getting nervous because that's outside of their control. They can't account for a third cousin and what that third cousin is doing. And so they start getting nervous. And I've kind of wondered how many of these individuals recognize that law enforcement is eventually going to be knocking on their door as a result of a third cousin putting their DNA in the database.
Each person who uploads their information to a database illuminates the identities of hundreds of other people around them. Parents, siblings, aunts and uncles, and cousins. A study by Ancestry DNA found the average person in the UK has 175 third cousins. And it doesn't stop there. The DNA in one person will be shared by hundreds of people yet to be born. Children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and cousins once or twice removed. Realistically, each person shares identifiable DNA with nearly 1,000 people, past and future. So it doesn't take many people uploading their data to reveal the identities of everyone living in a country. Back in 2018, a study found that using an existing database of just 1.3 million people, they could identify 60% of all Americans of European descent. And they estimated with a database containing just 2% of the population, you could find a third cousin or closer match in 99% of cases.
DNA storage is one of the things that we have that is really unlike anything else. If you look inside, this is at minus 20 degrees Celsius.
That keeps the DNA good for a long time?
We have DNA samples in here that are probably about 15 years old.
How many samples are stored in there?
Just over 2 million.
Whoa!
Yeah, so the capacity is just over 2 million.
2 million people's DNA stored in this one small room.
Correct.
Wow. By 2021, over 30 million people worldwide have taken a direct-to-consumer genetic test, the majority of which are through Ancestry and 23andMe, which do not currently work with law enforcement. But Family Tree DNA does.
If you ask Americans, should we have a national database where everyone's logged in it?
As their DNA.
Yeah, by their DNA and their name. Most Americans will be somewhat uncomfortable or potentially very uncomfortable with that. But we're kind of sleepwalking into that scenario.
There are some people who are concerned with privacy. If anyone chooses or decides that they do not want their results to be used for law enforcement matching, they can remove themselves from that.
I do worry about genetic information being used to discriminate against someone.
My biggest thing is health insurance. I worry about if you have somebody's DNA profile and some law is enacted, it gets into the wrong hands, and they say that this person has a proclivity, they're headed towards Parkinson's, they're headed towards this, headed towards that, and then rates skyrocket. That's the biggest place that I see as a privacy concern.
Once your genetic information's out there, it's out there. It's not like a credit card where you can get a new one. Yeah, you're giving away something that you don't know what it can do.
Well, yeah, our information isn't ours in the first place. Like,
right.
Our information is shared.
Yes, with your relatives.
Yes.
And although you may be adverse to this sort of thing, if they've already done it, in a way, you're out there.
In society today, you very clearly have two camps. There are those that are very comfortable having their genome available to be able to be searched for law enforcement purposes, and there are others that are not comfortable at all. And that's okay.
The problem is, of course, those people who don't want theirs to be searchable could have their DNA uploaded inadvertently by their relatives. Do you know what I mean? So, like, if I don't want my DNA to be searchable by law enforcement, but my sister uploads hers,
yes,
it's almost as good as me doing it myself.
Right now, Family Tree DNA's policy is we will only accept samples from law enforcement under certain circumstances. It has to be a sexual assault, identification of remains, DNA recovered from the scene of a homicide. And we also do child abductions. So if there's a child that's kidnapped and there's DNA evidence, we will process the DNA so they can try to find out who the abductor is. Those are the only cases that we will accept.
Got it.
Unfortunately now, GEDmatch has flipped off the switch. And GEDmatch has actually said that you're not allowed to have your information searched without opting in.
Right.
Was that decision by GEDmatch a direct result of this Golden State Killer case?
No, it wasn't.
No.
You want to tell the story?
You know, it had to do with a Utah case.
Where an elderly woman was playing the organ in a church.
And there was an individual who broke in and assaulted her.
But it wasn't a sexual assault, but it's a serious crime.
I tried to strangle her and left her for dead. I believe he thought that, she was obviously dead and left. The police, I believe, approached GEDmatch because that they were concerned that he was going to recommit other crimes.
But GEDmatch's terms of service said they would only help law enforcement in cases of rape or homicide.
Her problem was that she didn't die.
Because if she died, then...
If she died, it would have fit the conditions, and they would have uploaded the sample because it met the terms of service and everything.
So what happened? They didn't take that case?
They did.
They subsequently caught the individual from that search that they performed on GEDmatch.
But people within the genealogy world kind of got their passions inflamed, saying
The results of this trial so far?
of what
You
this tool
sure
should
took
be
your
used for,
time.
and they ended
I've
up
been
putting
stuck
a
here
lot
for
of pressure
ages.
on GEDmatch.
You mean
They
you
flipped the
didn't
switch
solve your
because they
share of
got
puzzles?
freaked out.
Of course
But at the
I
end of the
did.
day, it was a
Easy as
violation in
pie.
terms of service.
They're really
And
taking
I
us for
think
beginners.
ultimately led
You
to a
know
good
it's your
thing.
mom who set up this
Everybody got
trial,
zeroed
right?
out, and then
Wrong.
everybody gets to sign
It was
back
crafted
in.
a long time
Subsequently,
ago.
from GEDmatch
Not
was
sure.
sold to Verigen.
I can tell you, a new user today, when they sign up for GEDmatch, about 73% of them are signing up to allow law enforcement to search. We're pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I mean that's a high number,
It's a high number.
and it suggests that people want that in a sense.
How many second cousins or third cousins do you know? You know what I mean? You don't know that many of them. Without even knowing it, you're helping justice. You're helping a victim's family get a little bit of peace. Not closure, but a little bit of peace.
They get
And
an
why
answer.
not?
Partly, you could make an argument that if you want to be an activist helping catch criminals, one of the best things you can do is like encourage everyone you know to be tested and put in the database.
Correct. And, you know, there are millions of people who have tested at other companies that are not working with law enforcement. And if they want to help, all they have to do is download their raw data and they can upload it for free into our database.
I absolutely believe in a person's right to privacy, but I also absolutely believe we have a right not to get murdered or sexually assaulted or be part, having violent crimes committed against us. There has to be an equal balance.
That scale of my privacy has been taken because of a third cousin has been identified versus a mother who's talking about her daughter has been murdered, that scale is way the hell like this.
We're at a point now where, in many ways, technology has kind of outstripped where the laws are. I truly believe that ultimately this tool and all the concerns with it will probably end up in front of the nation's Supreme Court, and there will be a decision. My bottom line message, if you're going to make a decision, if there's going to be laws restricting law enforcement to use it, make sure that you're making an informed decision and not assuming what it is based on its DNA and genetics and law enforcement, because it really isn't what you think it is.
I got to keep a couple million people happy so that I have access to the identities, kind of, in a sense,
right?
Of millions, hundreds of millions of people.
Right.
And that's a pretty selective sample. These are people who are willing to give up their information to find their ancestors.
Yeah.
There may be many others who are militantly private, but they don't get a say in the decision of whether they're going to be searchable through that person or not.
True. That's the choice you make. So that, to me,
that's the choice you don't make.
It's a choice you don't make, but it's also the choice we have to make as a society. Is what's that balance? There is always going to be winners and losers in my mind, right? And I don't want to use losers in the negative sense there, but in a decision, at the end of the day, you have to balance, in my mind, the public safety with the public privacy.
Is DuckDuckGo, is that good?
I use it. I'm a little paranoid. So it's supposed to not track you as much, I guess. But yeah.
I have been working on this video for a couple of years, so I really want to thank Brilliant for sponsoring it. I appreciate their willingness to support me tackling complex and important stories. Brilliant is a website and app that teaches you all kinds of STEM concepts in an interactive and in-depth way. If you want to learn more about DNA or solving mysteries with deductive reasoning, I would recommend their courses on computational biology and logic. Check out this interactive logic puzzle. You have to figure out if the light is on or off, knowing that some of the characters may be lying to you. And instead of just telling you the solution, Brilliant allows you to try different configurations and discover the answer for yourself. If you get stuck, there are helpful hints to guide you along the way. In this instance, the light is on. See if you can figure out why. Now, Brilliant is offering 20% off an annual subscription to the first 200 people to sign up. Just go to brilliant.org/Veritasium. I will put that link down in the description. So I want to thank Brilliant for supporting Veritasium, and I want to thank you for watching. This is the most dangerous problem in mathematics, one that young mathematicians are warned not to waste their time on. It's a simple conjecture that not even the world's best mathematicians have been able to solve. Paul Erdős, a famous mathematician, said, "Mathematics is not yet ripe enough for such questions." Here's how it works. Pick a number, any number. 7? Good choice. Okay, we're going to apply 2 rules. If the number is odd, we multiply by 3 and add 1. So 3 times 7 is 21, plus 1 is 22. If the number is even, we divide by 2. So 22 divided by 2 is 11. Now we keep applying these 2 rules. 11 is odd, so we multiply by 3, 33, and add 1, 34. Even, divide by 2, 17. Odd. Multiply by 3, 51, add 1, 52. Even. Divide by 2, 26. Still even. Divide by 2, 13. Odd. So we multiply by 3, 39, add 1, and that's 40, which is even. So we divide by 2, 20. Divide by 2, 10. Divide by 2, 5. Odd. Multiply by 3, 15. Add 1, 16. Divide by 2, that's 8. And then 4, 2, and 1. Now 1 is odd, so we multiply by 3 and add 1, which equals 4. But 4 goes to 2 goes to 1, so we're in a loop, and the lowest number is 1. Now the conjecture is this. Every positive integer, if you apply these rules, will eventually end up in the 4-2-1 loop. This is commonly called the Collatz conjecture after German mathematician Lothar Collatz, who may have come up with it in the 1930s. But the problem has many origin stories and many names. It's also known as the Ulam conjecture, Kakutani's problem, Thwaites conjecture, Haas's algorithm, the Syracuse problem, and simply 3n plus 1. Why is 3x plus 1 so famous?
Among professional mathematicians, maybe it's not famous but infamous, in the sense that if someone actually admits in public that they're working on it, then there's something wrong with them.
The numbers you get by applying 3x plus 1 are called hailstone numbers, because they go up and down like hailstones in a thundercloud, but eventually they all fall down to 1. Or at least we think they do.
Yeah.
We won't you can think of the numbers as representing the height above the ground in meters. So a number like 26 would start 26 meters above the ground. And if you apply 3x plus 1, it rises up as high as 40 meters, and in total it takes 10 steps to get to 1. So 10 is called its total stopping time. But take the very next number, 27, and it bounces around all over the place. In fact, it climbs all the way up to 9,232. As an altitude, that is higher than Mount Everest, before it too falls back to the ground. In total, it takes 111 steps for 27 to get down to 1 and end up in the 4-2-1 loop. The paths that different numbers take vary so widely, even numbers right next to each other. So how do you even start to make progress on this problem? Well, honestly, mathematicians struggled.
People just decided that this was something invented by the Soviets to slow down US science, and it was doing a good job at it because everybody's sitting there twiddling their thumbs and making no progress on this trivial thing that you can tell school children.
Geoffrey Ligarius is the world authority on 3x plus 1.
The first time I met him, I was a senior in college, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Don't do this. Don't work on this problem. If you want to have a career, do not start spending time writing about this or publishing any papers about this. Do real math for a while to establish yourself."
Alex Kontorovich didn't listen. He and Yakov Sinai looked at the paths of the hailstone numbers. Were there any patterns? Well, obviously all of them end up at 1, but what about the paths they take to get there? The pattern is randomness. Here is the sequence of a large number chosen at random. The graph peaks and then drops so low that you can't really see what's happening at this scale. But if you take the logarithm, you find this wiggly graph with a downward trend. It looks kind of like the stock market on a bad day. And this is no coincidence. Both are examples of geometric Brownian motion. That means if you take the log and remove the linear trend, the fluctuations are random. It's like flipping a coin each step. If the coin is heads, the line goes up. Tails, it goes down. 3x plus 1 is just like the random wiggles of the stock market. Over long enough periods, the stock market tends to trend upwards, while 3x plus 1 trends down. Another way to analyze 3x plus 1 is by looking at the leading digit of each number in a sequence. Here are the hailstone numbers starting with 3 as the seed. And we can count up how many numbers start with a 1, how many start with a 2, how many start with a 3, and so on to make a histogram. We can do the same thing for the sequence that starts with 4, that's a short one, and for the sequences that start with 5, 6, and 7. Again, for each sequence, we're just counting up how many numbers start with each digit 1 through 9 and adding that to our histogram. If you keep doing this for more and more numbers, eventually the histogram settles into a stable pattern. For the first billions, your DNA
Hello cave dwellers, welcome into the cave. We're just following up now the Mr. Multi-System reveal that I did a couple of weeks ago. I'm joined by the designer of not only the hardware, but also the 3D printed case that has been received so well. It's Richard from Hebrew Electronics. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Neil. I'm delighted to be here with you all.
And what we're going to do today is try and answer all of the questions that we've seen about the multi-system. It was a pretty slick edited video, the first one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We're doing away with all this. This is just raw answering your questions, tough, easy, or otherwise, and hopefully we'll answer them all. But if we don't, you can leave a comment below, or there's also a link to the RMC Discord server where we've got a dedicated multi-system section and you can come and chat to us. And hopefully between all of this, we can answer all of your questions. And Richard will be monitoring them as well for the tougher hardware questions.
Yeah, we'll certainly try. We'll certainly try that.
Yeah. And the first thing you may want to know, quite an important thing, you can now go and buy the multi-system. With the release of this video, you'll find a link in the video description, or just go to rmcretro.store, click on the multi-system section, and everything is there. Now, if it's all a bit confusing at first, stick with us because we're going to explain the options in the video today. But just know that you can now buy them. It's officially live. It's a pre-sales process, because we don't know what the demand is for the different color cases. We put some polls up, didn't we?
Yes.
And what was the most popular one on the poll?
We had pretty much black and grey. Black was definitely the most popular, grey next, and then white came in last.
White, it was significantly
It
last.
was,
Nobody
yeah.
wanted
No
white.
one wanted white.
And then lots of calls for other colors like spiced orange,
yes,
which we might have an example of in the desk here, and other colors. And by the time this is on sale, because we're recording this video before it's gone up, there will be a choice of colors. We'll explain to you how we're producing these cases a bit later and what all the options are. But the important thing is you can buy it now, so go and check it out. So let's get into these questions, Richard. We were certainly surprised by the response to the first video, weren't we? I mean,
absolutely.
For me, that was the most popular video I've ever released on the channel. Within 48 hours, it had done 50,000 views, which is just huge numbers for me. So the appetite is just huge for it out there. So thank you to everyone for your response to it.
The comments as well, fantastic. Loads and loads of comments.
Yeah.
So that keeping up with those was a challenge, but really good to see all of those.
And at that stage, we were still in the testing stage. There was still scope to change the board. Yeah. And those comments did shape some of your decisions, didn't they?
Absolutely, yeah. We had some really good discussions about the SCART, which we'll talk about later. And yeah, a few little things got into the final tweaks just as we were finalising the design.
Yeah, so thank you for that. It was really valuable input. We'll have a quick recap on what the multi-system is. And by the way, this video has chapters. So jump around to the technical questions, to the shop questions, whatever part of the video you want to watch, just use the chapters along the bottom of the video. So a quick recap. Richard, do you want to do the honours? What is the Mr. Multi-System?
Wow, okay, so the multi-system aims to consoleize the Mr. project into a small form factor console that you can use a bit like you do with your Super Nintendo or your N64 or anything like that. So it allows you to get the best out of the Mister system, and it gives you some expansion options as well, things that we've thought about right now and things that we plan to do in the future.
And so the key components of this are Mister, which is an open source software project. It's been around for quite a number of years, hasn't it?
Yeah, about 3 or 4 years, yeah.
And that's nothing to do with us, Mister. That has been around for some time. So what we've created is, as you've described, a consoleized form factor that you can use Mister on. So you've got the software, you've got the multi-system, which we've created, and then the final component is the Jurassic DE10 that slots on the top. Do you want to just explain why that's there?
Yeah, absolutely. The DE10 is the heart of the Mister project, and it's a off-the-shelf evaluation board that's been used for development of all the Mister cores over the last, say, four years or so. And that powers all of the gaming cores, all of the computer cores that allows you to run the software from back in the day.
Yeah. So that's the idea. That's a quick recap of what it all is. Any questions, of course, leave them in the comments and we can elaborate on anything that we've missed. And the beauty of it is the consoleized form factor. Now, the hardware is complemented by this gorgeous case, in my opinion. I love the case that you've designed, Richard. You've got quite a lot of experience in the world of 3D printing and 3D design, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my background as an engineer goes back 30 years, and I was doing 3D printing back in the mid-90s for all sorts of professional reasons. Got really involved in the RepRap project when that kicked off around 2008 or so, when that was initially started.
And that was an open source printer project?
Yes, open source 3D printer project designed to self-replicate.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
that was its original aim, to actually produce parts that could produce more parts that could produce printers. And that's actually how many of them are still built today. They produce 3D printed parts that produce 3D printers.
So all of that experience has fed into the design of the case. The case, which is freely available to anyone who wants to 3D print it. Richard's done a pretty comprehensive guide. It's about 36 pages, isn't it? On tips on how to print it. All the files are out there. The case will also be available for sale in our store. So whatever works best for you, you can get hold of the case. So in the reveal video before, you saw the revision 1 alpha board that was being tested. You've got it there.
Yeah, that's the original alpha.
And some comments were made on different aspects. We gave you lots of close-ups of the board and comments were made on it. So why don't you describe to us the changes between that board and what we have now, which is the final retail board?
Well, it's got rid of all the bodge wires, Neil, so that's one good thing. And really, that was a lot of the initial problems that we had were just the fact that it was a very early prototype. So we had to just tidy those up. There was a few tiny mechanical changes to get the heights right on connectors, make everything fit a little bit better. We've condensed in the expansion port. That was one of the things that we had on the original design. We'd had 2 extra connectors on here. They've all been put into there. And we've made it a simple option now that you just flick a switch or change a jumper, so you can go to the 2 options on the expansion port or the snack connectors. We have got rid of one of the optional snack 2 connectors, which was a little bit presumptuous. We thought we would set down a standard that people might follow, but we actually decided it's probably better to bring that back. It can still